Board of Supervisors to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Supervisor Giomi.
Here.
Supervisor White. Supervisor Horton. Supervisor Schutte.
Here.
Mayor Bagwell.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you so much. We're now going to move to agenda item 3, which is our invocation, and I see that Pastor Jarvis is here. Would you please lead us?
Lord God, you made humans in your image and gave them the ability to create, maintain, and foster our cities and our cultures. And all of this requires wisdom and great care. You have said that if any desires wisdom and asks for it, that you will give it freely. So we pray for our elected Board of Supervisors that as leaders and administrators, you would give them insight, wisdom, and clarity on all decisions. May they make resolutions and discuss all matters today with care and confidence. We pray that each decision and direction made would lead to the smooth inner workings of Carson City and the thriving of our home and all of its residents. We are confident because you offer this promise, you will hear our prayer and answer it. And I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We're now on to our Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Hicks, will you please do us the honor?
My pleasure. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hicks. We're now on to the initial public comment of our agenda period. And I have Sue Masello. Would like to testify in general?
My name is Sue Masiello, Manhattan Drive. About 10 days ago, my husband and I looked at the long-term weather forecast and were afraid we'd have to tunnel out. In the past week, I think the city has plowed our road more times than it has in the 4 winters I've been here, maybe 3 times, and put down some sand. We moved here from Pennsylvania, and our township there is 320 years old this year. There are 2 regional roads, one along Delaware River called River Road, and the other York Road between Philadelphia and New York. We were the stopping point, the midway point. A lot of our local roads are still retain the names they had 300 years ago. There's Ferry Road, Quarry Road, Meeting House Road, Phillips Mill Road, Chapel Road, School Road. All of these roads speak to the necessity of your local people being able to access local friends, relations, churches, and businesses. I appreciate the attention to my road. I hope all of my neighbors have had similar plowings and sandings, because you cannot have a community if your local roads don't work. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't have anyone else signed up for general public comment, but I'll take one last quick swipe. Okay, then we'll move on to, thank you again for that, agenda item number 6, which is approval of our minutes of February 2nd, 2023. Did anyone have any corrections or changes? Not? I'll take a motion to approve, please.
I move to approve the Carson City Board of Supervisors and the Redevelopment Authority Board meeting minutes of 2 February 2023 as presented.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. Let the record reflect the motion was unanimous. Okay, we're on agenda item, our consent. Did anyone want anything pulled? I didn't have anything signed up from the public either. I'll take a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Move to approve the consent agenda consisting of items 7A, 8A, 8B, 8C, and 8D as presented.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Let the record reflect the motion was unanimous. Supervisor White, was that a yes? Yes, the motion was unanimous. Okay, we're now on to agenda item 10A, discussion and possible action regarding the proposed acceptance of a grant from Partnership Carson City for $90,000 as a sub-grant for our juvenile outreach specialist. Ms. Bannister? Just briefly give us an overview of what the position will accomplish for us.
Yes, ma'am. Allie Bannister for the record, Chief of Juvenile Services. I'm here today to bring to you the grant information seeking approval for the COSAP grant, which is the Comprehensive Opioid Stimulant and Substance Abuse Program grant, which is tied to Juvenile Outreach Specialist position at Juvenile Services. This position that the grant will fund was approved in the FY23 budget and was pending receipt of the award letter, so that's why I'm here today. This grant money will be used to fund a juvenile outreach specialist within the probation division. Their responsibilities will include identifying at-risk youth, providing or referring support and intervention services within the community, in addition to teaching early intervention and gang prevention within our community. Again, this subgrant will be for $90,000 effective January 1st, 2023 through August 14th, 2023. We would also propose that the acceptance of 2 additional subgrants, if they are awarded, for the same amount per year and for the same purpose through August 14th, 2025.
Perfect. Does any member have a question? Okay, is there any public comment on this item?
Just have one quick
Oh,
comment.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just
Supervisor
want to
Chiome?
thank Allie and the staff for going after this grant. Anything we can do to keep juveniles out of incarceration is the way to go, and I applaud you for going after this, and good luck pushing it forward.
Supervisor Chiome, is this your motion?
Yeah. I move to authorize acceptance of the subgrant in the amount of $90,000 as requested, and authorize the acceptance of 2 additional subgrants from the same source, each for the same amount per year for the next 2 years if they are awarded and subject to the same grant terms and conditions.
Probably a plethora of those could have happened. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. The motion carried unanimously. Thank you so much. Okay, we're on to agenda item number 11. A, this is discussion and possible action regarding a proposed settlement of claims by the state of Nevada and its political subdivisions, including Carson City, against Walmart. This was for our light reading. District Attorney Woodbury, we thought you did this to us, it really was. Yeah,
It's called full disclosure.
yeah.
Jason Woodbury, Carson City District Attorney for the record. Before you today is a proposed settlement of claims by Carson City against Walmart relating to the distribution of opioids. The proposed settlement, as you know, is lengthy, but the primary terms are typical. In exchange for a release of claims by Carson City against Walmart relating to opioids, Walmart will pay the state of Nevada the sum of $32,231,037.17, and in accordance with the One Nevada agreement that the Carson City is a participant in, Carson City's share of that settlement amount is estimated to be $328,343.01. With that, those primary terms explained, I'm happy to answer any questions that there may be about the settlement terms.
Does any member have a question? Supervisor White?
Sorry, I didn't get this question into you before. So it seems that the claimants were broken into 2 different classes, hence the really long list of all the cities and communities. But I see that Carson City is listed in both classes. It's listed on page 376 and page 509. So how does that work out? I guess it's I-42 of the actual agreement and W-18 of the actual agreement.
I'm sorry. Exhibit I is the primary subdivisions, and I'm sorry, what was the other page number you gave?
W-18,
What page of the packet, I'm sorry?
509.
And we are also identified in Exhibit W as a non-litigating threshold subdivisions exhibit. I'm going to have to speculate a little bit on that, just because I haven't looked into that particular issue. But I believe we're named in Exhibit I as a subdivision, whether or not you're litigating or not. Just all the subdivisions of all the states are listed there. And then Exhibit W lists us as a non-litigating subdivision, but that's particular as to Walmart, that no claims have actually been formally asserted in a complaint against Walmart. So even though we're listed twice, we don't get two bites at the apple. We're treated as a single subdivision under this, because you can be a participating subdivision even if you are not litigating.
Okay. All right, thanks. Sorry for not getting that to you.
No,
earlier.
that's fine.
Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, I'll accept a motion.
I'll do the motion.
Okay, Supervisor White?
I move to approve the settlement as presented and to authorize the mayor to execute the documents necessary to memorialize Carson City's participation in the settlement.
I second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Let the record reflect it was unanimous. Thank you. We're now on agenda item number 12A, which is discussion and possible action for the acceptance of SNPLA Round 18 grants and cooperative agreements from the U.S. Department of Interior. BLM, one for $1,883,875 with a $50,000 cash match from Quality of Life Funds for the Buzzy Ranch Water Rights and Wetland Enhancement Project. If they make these things any longer, these names, and $2,403,250 for the Carson River Trails Phase 2 Prison Hill Project. Miss Boyer, and Greg, and Miss Jennifer, are you going to take us through this at a high?
Sure. So, thank you, Mayor. Greg Bergen, Trails Coordinator for the record. The two grants, well, the first grant, the Buzzy's Ranch Water Rights Grant, would fund water rights, surface water rights to irrigate about 165 acres of one of our open space properties on the Buzzy's Ranch. And the second project would fund a trail along the west side of Prison Hill, about 2.5 miles. And that would be a multi-use trail, compacted DG surface designed for equitable use, in other words, for people of all ages and abilities. It would also include enhancements to the Coons Lane Trailhead, which was one of the most popular trailheads on Prison Hill, including a vault toilet, improvements to the parking area, improvements to the access road, and making everything ADA compliant at that trailhead, and then also include a safe street crossing of Edmonds Drive at Coons Lane so that people can access that area safely from the residential areas down below Edmonds. And with that, I will take any questions that the board may have.
Does anybody have a question? Nope. This is exciting. We're really doing well in our park arenas and open space areas, getting some grants lately, so it's wonderful. But is there any public comment on this agenda item? Ms. Orloff?
Good morning, Supervisors, Mayor. I I'd like to commend, of course, Open Space on getting this grant and all the other grants for open space. I think we have an incredible open space system. I think the Buzzies Ranch and the trailheads are going to be awesome. What I'd like to talk about is the 2.5 miles of trail that will be constructed. And I just have a great deal of concern about those. I've talked to people one-on-one and public comment, but I haven't gotten too far. Just so everyone knows, these trails are going to be like the 5th Street to Silver Saddle Ranch. It will be 10 to 12 feet wide with possibly 3-foot shoulders on either side, and it will be hard road base, subsurface or surface, whatever. I find that trail to be a little bit maybe overdone for our conservation easement, open space properties, 1306, protect, preserve, conserve. I think it's fairly, it's just, I think, it doesn't fit in to me with the natural environment. So I'm concerned about the 2.5 trails similarly that will go from Kuntz to the OHV area. And 1 mile of that will go behind residents on Gentry, behind their back property line. That line is contiguous with Prison Hill. The engineer hasn't been able to tell me how far behind those properties that trail will be, but it looks to be just behind the fire break. So I think in terms of quality of life and visual, it's going to be pretty impactful. I don't think there have been meetings, as far as I know, with the property owners to discuss it. And when property owners have called, basically, I think they've been told that this is going to be to me, it's a road, it's a non-motorized road, is for fire hazard protection, but that's not part of this grant. It's parks, trails, and natural areas. Or they're also told it's to be this wide so trucks can get in for maintenance, but if we didn't have a trail this big, we wouldn't need a truck to get in to maintain it. But it doesn't really match the trails on the west side of town or any of the other open space trails. This is a 10 to 12 foot wide road, non-motorized road. If you compare it to the OHV area, those roads are 7 feet wide. And that's a motorized area. So this is a really impactful trail, I believe. I've spoken with SNPLA, and they love working with Carson City. They greatly respect our open space. They like what we're doing here, and they're very willing to modify any project that comes across to them, whether it's this project, any project at all.
Thank you, Ms. Orloff. Thank you. Okay, anybody, any other public comment? Seeing none? Okay, are you guys ready? Supervisor White?
I move to authorize the acceptance of the grants and cooperative agreements as presented.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed, say no. Let the record reflect it was unanimous. Thank you. And I, for one, love the Silver Saddle Ranch wide road. Just want to say I live there on that one, and I cannot tell you all how used and adored this project that trail is, because it's wide enough to allow everyone to use it. And it is heavily used. So I trust in the staff to make good decisions, and if you need to not make it as wide, I know you'll make the right decisions. And I know I heard Chief Slayman once comment to us, wow, he got a fire break he never even thought about. So it's really had an unintended consequence, right? So thank you for your good work in getting
Can
this
I
grant.
add to that for a moment? You
go
know,
ahead. Supervisor Schutte?
I just really appreciate the equitable use aspect of this. And at the Trails, Transportation, and Tourism Summit, that was such a really huge point of the summit, was equitable use, that what people think of as trails, that's a limited perception. Trails mean different things to different people, and if there are mobility issues, it's helpful to have those wider trails. And so this is about meeting the needs of our whole community. So I applaud Parks and Rec and Open Space as well. Thanks.
All right, we're going to move on to agenda item 13A. This is discussion and possible action to adopt on our second reading, bill number 103, a proposed ordinance revising the rates and fees for the use of the Carson City sanitary landfill. Have Mr. Schultz. Were there any additional changes or any comments or things that came in that we need to address before we adopt on second reading?
Darren Schultz, for the record, Public Works Director. The only changes were the ones that were discussed in the meeting. Red line was attached, and yep, all good, no additional
So
comments.
just to put on the record, we had a public comment that was received by Carson Demolition. And we did make the change, and I did point that out to him, but I'd like for the public to recognize we do answer the questions to when we can, but just for the record, will you tell us where it details out that our franchise holder only gets the discounted rate when they're hauling city refuge, not out of county?
Sure. Adam Tully, Deputy District Attorney. So initially, this ordinance on first reading had 3 sections. It now has 4 sections. The section that we added governs landfill use fees for our exclusive franchisee. And it adds a new section to the code, so it's 1212.048. And if you look there, there's subpart 1, and it essentially, I'll just read it real fast. It says, if the franchisee disposes of solid waste that was not collected in Carson City or in any manner not in accordance with the exclusive franchise agreement. So we'll pause real quick, meaning even if they collected it in Carson City, but it was not a franchise service, right? So either collected outside of Carson City, or even if collected in Carson City but outside the franchise service, that franchisee is going to, so I'll start quoting again, pay the base fees and supplemental charges set forth in CCMC 12.12.047 for the disposal of solid waste at the landfill. So essentially, if they're not disposing of solid waste through the franchise agreement, they're treated like everyone else.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Supervisor Giomi, you had a question?
Yeah, so the franchise agreement covers, does not cover roll-off containers. Is that correct, to my knowledge?
I don't know the answer to that.
Do you know the answer to, well? Rick,
Yeah,
you
so
know.
it's for C and D. The C and D waste is open.
Is part of the franchise agreement?
No, it's
It's
not.
not.
That's what
That's
I'm
asking.
open.
Yes.
Yes, that's open to other haulers. It's open market.
Right, so those, I'm just trying to understand where this is applicable and where it is not applicable. So if a resident requests a dumpster for whatever reason, would that be part of the franchise agreement? Like, let's say I generate a lot of garbage and I want a 3-yard dumpster at my house instead of the bins,
Yes,
the plastic bins.
that is to
That's
come
part of the
franchise.
franchise agreement.
Yes, yes.
But if I'm doing a remodel and I ask for a temporary 20-yard dumpster for construction or for yard clearing, whatever the case may be, that is not.
Is it?
Okay, so that was my question.
For the record, Rick Cooley, Operations Manager, Public Works. Yes, those are all in there, and they're all in the calculated rates that are part of that franchise agreement. Whether it's C&D or MSW, doesn't matter. Those
So
are
the
part
difference
of the
between
agreement.
The difference between the last agreement with Waste Management and the current agreement then is that the roll-off containers, just calling them that for lack of a better term, are not exclusive to them.
Correct,
So that's what changed.
correct. What changed was third parties from outside. Yeah, third-party vendors, not the franchisee, could haul C&D waste in Carson City. That was the change that was made.
So then what, Adam, what would there be from the city that wouldn't be covered under the franchise agreement?
Who knows?
It's just to make sure.
It's just
though.
to make sure,
Okay.
it's to get people, because my understanding of the intent was when Waste Management's functioning under the franchise agreement, we want to give them the favorable rate so that residents don't have a
Right.
pass-through expense. But outside of that, we want them to be treated like everyone else. And so it may be, maybe the Venn diagram is total overlap, right?
Okay.
Maybe it's not, but at least this way,
Okay,
if
clear.
a problem pops up later, we've got the language we
yeah,
need.
because when I read that, I was just trying to think of what it would be included in that, and I don't think there is anything, but I understand why I mean, it's a no harm, no foul, basically.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, I'll accept a motion. Supervisor Shooty, or nope, Supervisor Horton, it is button first, go.
With the changes made by the district attorney's office.
I second.
Okay. All those in there were no changes, just for the record. It's just that he described the change that's in the ordinance.
Thank you.
Just want to clear the record. So it's for bill number 103, ordinance number 2023-3 as presented. Right. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no.
No.
Okay, let the record reflect the vote was 4-1, Supervisor Giomi voting no. Thank you for your work on that. Now we're going to do agenda item 14A, discussion and possible action regarding a request from a Carson City applicant to introduce on first reading a proposed ordinance amending the zoning map to change the zoning from limited industrial and single-family 1 acre to single-family 6,000 for parcel number 010061-87 from single-family 1 acre to single-family 6 for the southern approximately 4.5 acres of APN 010061-84 addressed at 1601 Fairview Drive, and from LI to SF6 for the northern approximately 9.7 acres of APN 010061-76 addressed at 1700 Colorado Street. Ms. Ferris.
I do have a PowerPoint, but I'm having some technical difficulties here. It's not working. I'd like to.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes a minute to warm up.
No,
It wasn't working this morning either. We tried it and it made
Okay, so I'll go ahead and hopefully we can get this going in the event that we do have questions. But at its meeting of January 20th, 2022, the Board of Supervisors accepted the 2021 Master Plan Report from the Planning Commission and identified the subject parcels for consideration of mapping corrections. This was before the Planning Commission for consideration as 3 separate master plan amendments and 3 separate zoning map amendments. At their December 20th, 2022 meeting, the Planning Commission continued all of those items to the January 25th, 2023 meeting. The subject parcels are in an area with a mix of uses, including residential, warehousing, personal storage, office space, and retail. APN 010-06187 is located at the northeast corner of South Solomon Road and Colorado Street, so it's the westernmost parcel shown here. It's currently vacant, and it has a split master plan designation of mixed-use commercial and medium-density residential, and split zoning of limited industrial and single-family 1 acre. The zoning is not consistent with the underlying master plans. APN 010-06184 is the center parcel. It's currently developed with office, warehouse, and storage uses. There's a split master plan designation of mixed-use commercial and medium-density residential, and split zoning of limited industrial and single-family 1 acre. The single-family 1 acre zoning is not consistent with the underlying medium-density residential master plan. Additionally, the existing use does not conform to the zoning and master plan on the southern half of the parcel. APN 010-06176 is located at 1700 Colorado, so it's the easternmost parcel shown here, and it's developed with a manufactured home park. The master plan designation is medium-density residential, and there is split zoning of limited industrial and single-family 6,000. The existing zoning and master plan are not consistent with one another, nor are they consistent with the existing use of a manufactured home park. The manufactured home park was approved in 1985. At that time, the property was zoned limited industrial and SF6 as well. The zoning code allowed for mobile home parks in these zoning districts subject to a special use permit. Since that time, the zoning code has changed, making this a non-conforming use with both the limited industrial and the single-family 6,000 zoning. Additionally, the limited industrial zoning is not consistent with the underlying master plan of medium-density residential. So at the January Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission considered a master plan amendment along with a zoning map amendment to mixed-use commercial and general commercial across all 3 parcels. However, after hearing from members of the public regarding concerns with increased traffic from additional commercial uses in the area, as well as creating additional non-conforming uses for one of the parcels, the Planning Commission determined that the existing master plan designations made sense for the area and recommended no change to the master plan. Additionally, because the Planning Commission did not recommend a change to the master plan, the Planning Commission is recommending zoning for each parcel, which is consistent with the existing underlying master plan. So I'll take you through their recommendations. For the westernmost parcel, they're recommending from limited industrial and single-family 1 acre to single-family 6,000, and that's assessor parcel 010-06187. This would create consistency with the underlying master plan. For the center parcel, from single-family 1 acre to single-family 6,000 for the southern approximately 4.5 acres of APN 010-06184. This would create consistency with the underlying master plan designation. I would note, however, that the existing non-conforming use will remain non-conforming with this designation. And finally, the easternmost parcel from limited industrial to single-family 6,000 for the northern approximately 9.7 acres. This is APN 010-06176. addressed at 1700 Colorado Street. Again, this would create consistency with the underlying master plan, but the existing non-conforming use would remain non-conforming with the application of this zoning. I would also note that we did send courtesy notices to each property owner of these 3 parcels in advance of the December Planning Commission meeting. And we have noticed each of them again with each Planning Commission meeting as required by NRS and the City Municipal Code. We did hear back from the owner of the easternmost parcel, so the mobile home park, and he's okay with whatever we end up doing as long as he can continue with his mobile home park use. And then the owner of the center parcel attended the last Planning Commission meeting and spoke. He had concerns with the general commercial zoning and really pushed for leaving things the same, though he does understand that the recommended change would continue the existing non-conforming use, and he was okay with that as well.
So why wouldn't we rezone the mobile home park to MH6?
So a mobile home park is a permitted primary use in the MHP zoning and retail commercial and general commercial zoning districts with a special use permit. If we went to any of those zoning districts, it would require a master plan amendment. So really, the Planning Commission was looking at the underlying master plan and saying, you know, for this area, this underlying master plan really makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we make it as conforming as possible, recognizing that it would continue some non-conforming uses?
Okay. Were the residents in the park notified?
They were.
Okay, thank you. I didn't hear you say that. I just heard you say
Yeah,
owners.
they were,
So-
and we heard a lot from them, and they were very concerned with changes to any kind of commercial use.
Right, thank you. I move to introduce on first reading Bill number 104.
I second.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no.
No.
Record reflect the motion was 4 positive, 1 no by Supervisor White. We're now on agenda item 14B. Discussion and possible action regarding a request from Will Adler on behalf of Green Thumb Industries to introduce on first reading a proposed ordinance providing location requirements for medical marijuana dispensaries and retail stores in the retail commercial use district. Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mayor. You all are moving quickly this morning. I'll keep you going. Okay. Okay, as the mayor stated, the applicant is seeking to expand where medical dispensaries, medical marijuana dispensaries and marijuana retail stores are allowed in Carson City. Right now, they're essentially limited to Highway 50 and South Carson Street in the GC and GI zoning districts. By way of background, in 2013, the state adopted the Medical Marijuana Act that was signed into law in the state of Nevada. On June 19, 2014, the Board of Supervisors in Carson City needed to decide not whether or not they were going to allow marijuana, but if they were going to allow marijuana, where would it be allowed? So it was kind of interesting in watching the tape, if any of you had the chance to do that, because the discussion was really sort of like, okay, if we allow this, and we're not having the discussion about whether or not to allow it, where would we allow it? So that was, and I'm going to come back to that conversation in a little bit. But they did end up introducing ordinance. I'm going to talk more about that in a second. On July 3rd, 2014, they adopted the ordinance. In 2016, the state of Nevada passed the Regulation Taxation Marijuana Act.
And in 2017, the Board of Supervisors in Carson City adopted an ordinance to allow recreational marijuana establishments, including the recreational marijuana stores, subject to the same rules as the medical marijuana facilities. So basically, same locational criteria. Going back to June 19, 2014. Okay, so in 2013, state of Nevada says, okay, we're going to allow counties to have these marijuana establishments. They can be labs, production facilities, cultivation facilities, dispensaries where you go and buy them, the marijuana, medical marijuana. Okay, so the Board of Supervisors and throughout the state, all the counties were having these conversations. Do we want to allow this in our county? It's an unknown, right? Everyone was looking at Colorado as an example, but maybe that was a good example, maybe it wasn't. And they were trying to figure out where to allow this. At that meeting on June 19, 2014, the board was really struggling. There were a lot of people at that meeting. And it's interesting because a lot of those people live in that area where Heather was just talking about off of Fairview, because they were very concerned about the GC zoning in that area and the lack of compatibility. The Planning Commission, when they looked at this, they recommended that if you had these medical marijuana dispensaries, there'd be a 1,000-foot separation from churches, parks, playgrounds, daycare facilities, and recreational facilities. 1,000 feet. Didn't make it into the ordinance. Because what happened was that was the Planning Commission's recommendation. It got to the Board of Supervisors, and the proponents for the medical marijuana dispensary stood up at that meeting and said, we don't want it over on Colorado. We don't want it over on where they're talking about. Everyone we're talking to wants it either on Highway 50, east of the interchange, which I think was a future interchange at that point, or they want on South Carson, south of Fairview. So we don't want that 1,000-foot separation. That's gonna be a hurdle and a burden. Instead, let's agree that will only be in the general commercial or the general industrial, and it will be these areas on South Carson and these areas on Highway 50. And the board's like, oh, okay, all these people opposing it, now they're good because we just limited the location. And it's not going to be in their neighborhood, so that compatibility issue just came off the table. That was back in 2014. We didn't know what to expect. Okay, so the board adopted the ordinance with those standards, but they also had a lot of other standards that are in our development standards, which talk about a single point of entry, hours of operation, different other separation requirements in the neighborhood of 300 feet separation, things like that. Okay, so then we fast forward to our application today. So now we have an applicant who's saying, okay, back in 2014, you limited the locational criteria. You now have 6 years of experience, and we'd like you, Carson City, to consider opening up North Carson for marijuana dispensary or marijuana retail stores and medical marijuana dispensaries. Well, if we're looking at North Carson, as you'll remember from when we did our annual master plan report, we're looking at the RC zoning. And so what the applicant's saying is, please allow it in the retail commercial zoning along North Carson. It will be west of Hot Springs. And he identified, and the map's up there, what his proposal was. And he identified townships and ranges. The Planning Commission considered this on January 25th, and at that meeting, they voted 4-3 to recommend approval. But they said that it should not go any farther north than the intersection of Arrowhead Drive and Medical Parkway. They felt like going farther north than that wouldn't be compatible with neighboring uses, and that the farthest north it should be able to go would be Arrowhead Drive and Medical Parkway. Again, the farthest south it would go would be Winnie, so it would stay out of the downtown. Those who voted no cited the lack of compatibility with the neighborhood. You can go to the next slide. I'll remind the board that when we consider a text amendment to the code, we're looking at 3 findings of fact, and those are on the board right now. One's master plan consistency, land use compatibility, and the impact on public services and facilities. And again, based on 6 years of experience with these type of uses, 4 of the 7 planning commissioners found that they could make these three findings in the affirmative, provided it did not go farther north than the intersection of Medical Parkway and Arrowhead Drive, and have recommended approval. The applicant, Will Adler, is present, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Does any member have a question? Supervisor White?
On page 635 of the packet is the agenda for the Planning Commission. And it says there that noticing was completed consistent with NRS and CCMCC. What noticing was this, and were property owners notified? What does this refer to?
Microphone.
Thank you. When we contemplate what can be called a zoning text amendment, our requirement is to publish in the newspaper, which was done. We also put it on the city's website and the state's website. It's called a notice of public hearing. So the Planning Commission's notice of public hearing was published in those three places. That's it. There was not a first-class mail because it's not a site-specific application.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Supervisor Shooty?
Hope, in terms of, I know watching the meeting, the area was reduced. Do reductions have to be aligned with roads, if you will?
We have to be able to interpret it. So, in fact, I don't really like township and range because it's a difficult interpretation, and staff can figure it out because we have access to a lot of maps, but the public at large doesn't necessarily know where townships and ranges are. And so does it have to align with roads? No, it does not. Does it have to be administratively feasible so that the staff can implement it and ideally the public can read it and understand it? Yes.
So the township and range, so looking at 635 and you have the 4 quadrants. So the lower quadrant to the south, that includes, North Carson Street, Tiger Drive area. That square, is that considered a range?
The ranges are larger squares. So
Right.
what you'll see is essentially you can see 4 complete squares and 2 partial squares in figure 4.
It's a section. It's called a
Right.
section.
Right, okay.
That square is called a section.
Okay.
Thank you. So what you'll see is we didn't call out the entire section. We reference the section to get you to where you need to be. And then it starts describing the zoning districts, and then it starts describing streets.
Yeah, my dilemma with this is I think that section is not compatible. I think the section to the north is compatible. That's where my dilemma is in this.
Okay, so I think what you're telling me then is if we look at the portion that's in Township 15N, Range 20E,
Correct.
07 and 08, you're stating that you're having difficulty with neighborhood compatibility in those 2 sections?
Absolutely agree.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So just for the audience or anyone that's listening or whatever, that's it is better to call out the streets so that everyone can be clear as to what we're talking about. So on page 635, it's the dark black area that's highlighted to be part of this. That's adjacent to Tiger Drive, Janelle Drive. Those areas, I absolutely concur, are not compatible. Those are steep residential areas and certainly areas of concern in our community to begin with. So
Basically anything north of Nye Lane.
Yeah, that's a
is
good way to say,
saying that
maybe
way people
Nye
kind of
Lane.
know.
We want to cut that out. I just can't, I can't make the finding if that's included.
South would be removed and north would remain in under their comment. That's what I'm asking. That's what you're
Right.
saying, essentially, right? So
Right.
you would exclude, in your opinion, south of Nye Lane, sections 7 and 8.
Mhm. Yep. Well, or I won't make the findings.
Well,
Right. Because I don't think it's compatible to put one in that particular area. Anybody? Supervisor Giaomi?
My struggle is kind of the same issue I had before when we were talking about not allowing us to go from 2 to 4. That ship sailed. But I made a comment at the time that struggling with the 300-foot perimeter to residential. And I wanted to expand it, and I realized that if we were to expand it, we would create, at least in one instance for sure, non-conforming use. But I'll remind this board, we just approved a change that was a non-conforming use. And we didn't seem to mind that. So I don't know what the right distance is. You know, I know if we took this North Carson to 1,000 feet for residential as well, I don't think there's any place
Right.
that would fit. I've been playing with it on a map here. You know, if you took it to 500, there might be some places. I'll leave my comments there. That's kind of my issue.
Mhm. Anybody else? I do want to say there was a public comment that came in from Miss Humphrey, and I did just want to answer it. She thought this was expanding the number of stores. It does not. We are not expanding the number of stores from the regulation. It still will only be 4. So I just wanted to answer that for her, that it really is about where they can be located. The 4 stores that were approved, where are the locations?
Can I ask another question?
certainly.
Mayor, sorry.
No problem.
If the board changed the distance and residential moved in after, what implications does
That
that
was
mean
my
for you?
question.
It would have been lawfully established, and so it could continue. If it went to expand, we would then look at the nonconformity at that point and treat it as a nonconforming use.
So because the business would exist, the cannabis business would exist, the residential developer and people buying it would be aware, obviously, that they're within X number of feet of it because it's there, right? I mean, I guess that's the argument.
Think of a shoe store. It's an easier conversation. Let's pretend you had a separation requirement. Sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
You have a separation requirement. The shoe store can't be within 200 feet of a park. Okay, shoe store establishes there's no park within 200 feet. A park establishes at a later date. Then all of a sudden, the shoe store can continue to operate, no problem. But then the shoe store is selling tons of shoes, wants to expand. Now we have an issue because we have a nonconforming use. So it's your textbook nonconforming use situation.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Adler, did you want to discuss the concerns of Supervisor Schutte and myself?
Yes. Thank you for the opportunity. Will Adler, for the record, representing Silver State Government Relations and GTI Rise here today. And I'm legislatively trained, so I might keep saying that. But I actually find a lot of agreement with the comments from the board today. there is a lot of likeness in the current southern zoning township and range district and the eastern township and range district. I call them the zoning bubbles, but I was told not to say that. So, so those polygons there. What we did is we actually just highlighted the entire outside of what is retail commercial in that district that goes down to Winnie Lane. We were advised, we do not want this near the downtown. That was a frequent comment in the planning commission and by the planning commissioners. And the original nexus of this, the original origin was just to remove the township and range language altogether, right? Because today GC, general commercial, is allowable in these townships and ranges. Industrial is allowable in these townships and ranges, right? But that immediately was addressed as being too much of a change. Carson has always been sort of the most conservative community that allows cannabis, and that's something we kind of have embraced this whole time as well. But in this, you guys have had a specificity that nobody else has, a single district or two where you can allow these. To mimic that, though, we did say today our desire to not put a second store behind Sierra Wellness or Zen Leaf today, or a second store next to our first location in Rise in the south end of town, in that end of town. So we looked around and we asked realtors what is viable, what's out there. And a similar kind of spacing, the similar retail commercial area is in the north end of town here. So we did highlight that area, but to be frank or truthful or however we state that, the actual target location is north of Nye Lane today. I mean, it is that general commercial on both sides of the street, on Carson Street going out of town. It really, south of that, it gets a little tight anyhow, and it is really densely packed in. Maybe a photo on my own PowerPoint would show it even better. It gets really tight with schools. It gets tight with, oh, thank you. Here we go. Let me just skip through this. But right here, you can see, what we're desiring is to not be a burden to the community, not be an eyesore, not be unwelcome, right? And in the state law and in your current code today, you can sort of see these are schools, these are daycares, these are, known community facilities that the community does not want cannabis around. The state has identified those as not being ideal. So we did try and find a place in town that is the furthest away, that is dedicated to retail sales, that is a commercial location, because that would be an ideal location for a retail establishment such as a new dispensary. And in that, I do agree that it gets less retail commercial and less retail based the more south we get. So south of Nye Lane, I would actually be fine with deleting that part of it, or maybe a clear way to say it is removing of township range, all those things 5 and 8 entirely from the current request. I don't know how to. Well, okay. I on this one, I don't know, but the ones on the right, however you write it, but it is quite difficult to write these, and I took a couple attempts trying to do so, but the previous comments of taking it down from the northern end of the township range to Medical Parkway was totally fine and desirable to us. It simply was me writing it to the top of the township range before to have ease of writing these, actually. So it's totally fine when we were asked by the planning commission, could you lower it? Because yes, we'd be glad to. I mean, that wasn't in our targeted zone anyways anyhow. But the polygon before you is one of a long, arm wrestling contest a little bit with the planning commission to figure out what would fit in Carson City best. And honestly, if you guys believe Nye Lane as well would be better to take out south of there, I agree with you. I do think that's a fine, note to make.
Okay, thank you. Is there any public comment on this item?
I do have a little PowerPoint. I could go through this, but I just want to say briefly, GTI is, Green Thumbs Industries is Rise Cannabis. We have been in Carson City for a good long time, but, generally they had their opening date September 8th, 2016. And it was a pretty long struggle to get to that date even. It took about $3 million to do the tenant improvements and build out that store and actually make it acceptable to the state and its requirements. And those requirements are going to be standing today for this new facility. Rise is also a big community member and the grand champion of the Carson City Luau, like 5 years running. Another thing is I just want to emphasize this store will have nothing less than every other requirement we've seen in the state. This will have the full 24-hour securities. This will be a community hub that it will not be an eyesore. It will be a real investment in this area, wherever it ends up. But it is their intention to open a store, and today we are unable to find a retail location that is in the current 2 zoning maps. So just looking at them today, in the south, it's very tight. There's a very small boot there, and Rise already has a location in that area. And in the east side of town, we have the Far East there, and then sort of Sierra Wellness is already located, or Zenleaf is located in there, and having a second store there as well would create another cluster that we think commercially and for the benefit of Carson City would be lacking. And that's why we did choose this area and the discussion we had before. But thank you so much for hearing us out, and I would field any questions that you have, but Rise would want to emphasize that, this is the first store they ever opened in Nevada, and it's only the second store they opened nationally. And now they're a multinational company, and they do feel like the start that they got here and the lessons they learned is something they've been able to use and grow everywhere. So they appreciate the welcome they've had in Carson City and the amount of time they've spent here. And they promise to bring that same dedication to the next facility they're able to open here, because they've been a long-time participant in everything they could in this community, and they've had a really good record of full compliance and no issues as a company in our operation. And hopefully that hears out today. But thank you very much, and thank you for hearing this odd zoning change that we're asking for.
Supervisor White, did you have a question for Mr. Adler?
Questions for the applicant?
Certainly.
Yeah. Morning. On page 641, 642, and 643 of the packet is your document where you're claiming that clustering would limit future business investment, and also that clustering will create several detrimental impacts. Can you explain to me how this clustering will limit business investment and what the detrimental impacts of clustering are?
Yeah, I would be glad to sort of emphasize that or explain it more in depth. To date, we're seeing different cannabis communities and economies showing up nationally, and it's not just in Nevada. So I'd be clear about that. But Montana has no limit on dispensaries at all. So that's more of an extreme example. But in a town of 8,000 people, they ended up with 15 dispensaries. That ended up having the exact opposite effect of increasing, legal use of marijuana. It actually created a situation where people just drove from parking lot to parking lot looking for the best deal, right? That's on the extreme end of things, and that is a extreme clustering example that we are luckily not looking at in Carson. But in Reno, they had the same example. They had a decision from their council to limit where dispensaries could be located, because when they saw 2 come together, they immediately saw one guy do the big store and the big, large investment and get it going. Another guy just set up a small shop that he's trying to make a drive-through out of, basically, and use their code for that. So they've actually implemented 2,500 zoning barrier around each dispensary between dispensaries. They said you cannot put them within a half mile of each other, because we want to see unique dispensaries to have unique investments in each community. Because they knew if you have one there, another guy can just move right in and use that marketed material and do a smaller store. That's happening today in Sparks. Next to Silver State Relief in Sparks, a guy has just applied to move the Reef dispensary into the same parking lot. Silver State Relief has now sued the city of Sparks because they're declaring the exact same implementation of clustering causes the reduction of one guy's investment for the next one. In general, though, we do see price shopping. We do see a lot of inter-cannabis competition down in Vegas, where we do see lots and lots of licenses sort of structured all around the strip. And that is where you see people who have had, first investments. The second guy moves in and really doesn't do much else but get a pop-up store that's just enough to, skim off what's the known cannabis business in the area. So we've seen examples around the state, and I didn't want to be too specific about it, but it causes, commercial impacts, but it also causes community impacts where it becomes a known cannabis district and people want to be there for that, other than just it being part of the district as a whole. As far as investment in general, there is other options to try and open up this license. And because there's no other real estate or commercial areas in town, One of the options to perfect this license could be moving it into their current cultivation facility. That is in the industrial area today and is zoned correctly and could be dispensary today, but it's off a Deer Run Road, right? To be frank with you guys, it doesn't feel like it would be a sensible investment to just do this just to have a license. They wanted to actually bring something that would be of use or a retail capacity to Carson City. So that's specifically the example on the table today is we don't want to say, put it on 50 because there's already a large dispensary established on 50 and one on Mound House just outside. So if we were to do that investment, it'd be significantly smaller than the investment they would put into a northern property. Thank you.
So then on pages 649 and 651, there's a couple of letters there that, in my mind, disturbingly are identical letters. But those letters claim that there's no commercially viable locations. I guess what I'm looking for is the definition of commercially viable, because within this, the existing areas, there are a number of commercial properties. So perhaps maybe there's nothing you can find you're willing to rent, but to say that there's no commercially viable locations, I find that comment pretty suspect. Can you elaborate on that terminology?
I would lead that to whomever defined commercially viable, but I didn't write that letter maybe, but I do think the conversations I've had, at least with the real estate team that we have in town, NAI Realty, they've been searching the town pretty thoroughly. So there's several layers of issues when it comes to finding a cannabis facility or finding a viable property to move one into. The first one is the zoning, right? The zoning barriers in Carson City are more restrictive than anywhere else in Nevada. It's not just the zoning, bubbles or township ranges. It is the 300 feet from a residentially zoned location. You cannot be on an adjacent or abutting street with that. Lots of addresses actually aren't on Carson Street. They'll be on the street next to it, which eliminates you because you're on a residentially adjacent street then. So it is a hunt and a peck to find something viable. Then we found 2 or 3 viable locations, one on Highway 50 actually, where the owner would not lease to a cannabis facility. The loan he had would not allow him to lease to a cannabis facility because structurally banking, some people will not be allowed to lease to us because our income is still a Schedule I drug, and their loans will not allow us to have a sublease or a lease with them at all around those terms, right? So the layers of trying to get to a location are pretty severe. So literally, I don't think we found a location on Highway 50 other than one that is within sight of Zenleaf, right? It is kitty corner to it that will lease to us, just to be factual there. And then there are 3-ish properties, maybe 2, that could work in this new northern township range that we've been able to contact landlords that would lease to us. So that is truthful, and that is what we're stating today because that's what we found. In the south, it's not commercially viable today for Rise to say that clearly, to put another license there because they already operate a cannabis dispensary in the southern township range allowable, GTI Rise Carson City. So it would not be viable for them to invest again in the southern part of Carson City. So to be clear on that. But it has been a very long process to try and find a facility, and they're doing everything they can, honestly. So I appreciate the comments. And they do like operating here, and they would like to keep, doing it what they can in this community. Thank you.
That's all I have.
Okay.
Can I ask you a quick
Supervisor
question,
Giommi, and then I'll go to the public comment.
You talked about the locations on North Carson Street, and I know sometimes those are sensitive discussions. Can you elaborate on where they are, or is it not something you're comfortable doing? And I'm fine if you're not comfortable, because I understand that. I just.
Will Adler, for the record. I can generally state that they're the ones that are retail facilities. They are current retail spaces facing Carson Street that are designed to be retail outlets, right?
Okay.
In the area, north of that 7-Eleven there, yes, and then sort of around the Kmart area, but there is a current restricted layer cake of issues with the whole Kmart property.
Yes.
And then sort of
Aware of that,
we all know that. So there's some difficulties there, even identify something in that, but
Okay.
There, it's all the retail sort of facing properties, but
Okay. Go ahead, state your name for the record.
Hi, Patricia Toon, RN for the record. I'm I'm a bit baffled to hear this morning about the Walmart litigation with opiates and then the grants for our children at risk. And now we're here talking about marijuana dispensaries. So I'm a bit confused about where we stand with all that. We have a beautiful city. I was recently in Sacramento. We used to take our children there. We won't go there again unless we absolutely have to because of the homelessness, the drugs, all of the trash, the debris. The businesses have security in front of each business, paid security. There are no restrooms for customers because of the issue of the drugs. Drugs is the #1 cause of homelessness. And here we are discussing more facilities. I don't believe Douglas County has dispensaries. They're in Nevada. Maybe I'm wrong. I just don't think this is, when we can't get doctors to come to our town, why is that? Why are we not drawing those types of people groups that better our community? Why are we trying to encourage more drug use? So I understand the law. I understand you are going to do what you need to do, but I don't really understand the direction that Carson City is going. We have a darling, sweet, quaint, beautiful, wonderful town, and this is what we want to bring more of. Why aren't we bringing more businesses that encourage families and healthy living and promote great lifestyles instead of people that are unhappy and need medical marijuana? So I hope you'll consider those things. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Is there any other public comment? Come on up. You have to push the button and it'll be green. There you go.
Good morning. My name is George Rucker. I live in northern Carson City, and I'm quite proud of the fact I'm in northern Carson City, 40 years in the same house on Bryce Drive, which is only a stone's throw from, quote unquote, our new outlet that we're going to have for our drugs. We are not wanting it in our neighborhood. I guarantee you, we do a lot of dog walking in our area. We have a lot of elderly people who are retired. It's a very strong area of wanting to leave things status quo. We're not interested in bringing in drugs and the associated problems that go along with them. We're hoping that you will plead with us and stay and keep our area as free and beautiful as it is now without having the other issues. I remember when we started this whole conversation, how we were only going to have, quote unquote, 2 outlets in southern Carson City. Now we have 4 in Carson City. Now we're going to go and put a few more in northern Carson City. We don't want it. We hope you will listen to the citizens in the area. I can bring you in probably a whole long list of people from our area who will be saying, we'll sign the petition. We do not want it in our area. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time for addressing you, and I hope you will represent the people in our area that anyway, that's the way it is. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
Heather Coe, and we just had shootings over marijuana with young children at our high school. I don't know if all of you want more of this because you think it's fun to invite even more and more crime, which we already have. They don't use banks, so it's an open invitation for crime. And there are a lot of kids that go to Silver Oak Park. They're back and forth all the time. And I think it's an absolute crime, the building that's going on to begin with, because I watch kids get hit almost all the time. Just watched a dog die and an older man get hit not that long ago. But on drugs, it should be even more fun. And it must be fun if this is what you're even considering. Why do we need to have this on every corner entering Carson? We already had a shooting at the one up by Highway 50 last year. And I don't know if it matters to anyone that this is going on in Carson. We've never had crime this bad before. And ever since this, it's gotten out of hand. And this affects our high school kids. So I would beg and plead, please don't do this so that we have one on every end of Carson. It will hurt our children. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have any other public comment?
May I make a closing comment on that? I too live north end of Carson City, and I that was my next door neighbor who did get hit by a car, and his dog did die. But that is something that I've been mindful of as well. And I did, reach out to a lot of folks in the community. But the community we serve is not the community that you maybe see in front of you every day here. But Rise did serve 170,000 people last year, and 40,000 of them were unique purchasers from outside their program, and 20,000 were people here. And they're proud to be able to have that service and have the ability to be a vessel for people to meet Carson City from coming down from Tahoe. And they're trying to emphasize that in no way would they take this lightly, and that this would be them moving into a new part of the town, but also trying to say they're here to not be impactful and here to bring the same service and the same quality they've done before. And to this date, they've never had a violation or any police activity at their facility because they try and run a really tight ship, and they're proud of it. So thank you very much.
Madam Mayor, if I may, Hope Sullivan, Community Development Director, just for the benefit of the public more as well as the board. The applicant is here as a proponent for his client. If you choose to amend the code is the rule book, right? It's the rules we apply when people want to develop land. It's not specific to any one applicant. Anyone can apply to utilize these code provisions. So I just want to be really clear that although the applicant does have a client and is advocating on behalf of his client, the rules will not be specific to any one business. Thank you.
I guess I'm just a little bit lost in the accident with the dog and the man. What's that got to do with
Nothing at all.
retail? I'm just trying to be clear in that.
It was a
Was she
tragedy of a
indicating
teenage.
someone bought something,
No.
smoked it on site, and then got run over? I
was
mean,
a-
I'm trying to
it was a-
understand the issue.
It was a teenage girl texting, sadly, who didn't see my neighbor in a crosswalk. But it's thankfully he survived. He's 84 years old, actually. But that I was just saying that has nothing to do with cannabis in any fashion. But additionally, as Hope Sullivan did just state, I want to emphasize that this is a change to the zoning code, yes, but anything that we would select in Carson City, we would still have to come back before you all, receive a special use permit, go through the full vetting and requirements. And at that time, if you did not like the facilities we could find at the north end of town, you could tell us that at that time and reject those dispensary applications if they did not have the right impact on the community, if they did not look to be sufficient, or if community outreach came to you at that time and said, we do not want this dispensary in that location. That is still a viable opportunity for you guys to say, sorry, yes, the zoning has changed, but this does not meet our requirements. No special use permit for this particular location. But we're just asking for a new region to be assessed, and you'll get to assess the actual location if we get to bring a special use permit before you guys. So thank you very much.
Supervisor Schutte?
Will, can you share with the board and the public what all is sold at these outlets? So obviously it's cannabis, marijuana, but what are the products? How are they used?
Thank you, Commissioner, or Board Supervisor Schutte. I'm in the wrong room. I almost called you Assemblywoman. The products sold at these dispensaries are medical marijuana and recreational marijuana products, but we actually see, at least at the Carson City Rise store, we see an older demographic, right? So we actually see our average age is 42, and our trend line is, you know, in the gray-haired community. So specifically over there, we see a lot of edibles sold and a lot of vapor products sold, and not as many active flower ingredients. But cannabis itself is sold as bud or flower, right? You know, the actual marijuana product you see, or it's wrapped up into a pre-roll, a joint that can be, you know, smoked immediately, or it's created into a plethora of products in the production line that are vapor or cartridges, like smokable products, or edibles, or even tinctures and tonics or drinkables. But another big part of their market is actually lotions or topicals that are rub-on or applicable to on-site pain and things like that. And they sell a bunch of CBD products there as well. So it's not strictly cannabis only, but you know, in the cannabis space, they definitely sell everything you could imagine.
So you're saying that the cannabis products, it's not just THC, it's the CBD, and it's not just product used for recreational purposes, but it's product used for pain relief or anxiety or that kind of thing?
Our biggest, we did a survey, our biggest use for marijuana was aid with sleep. So people use it for sleep aid almost 2 to 1, actually, especially when it comes to edibles. People tend to use it to use continual sleep throughout the night. A lot of veterans use that, you know, exclusively for that purpose. But yeah, we see a ton of people who use it for whether they have a medical marijuana card or not, to be clear, because only about 3% of our purchases in one store and about 8% at the Rise store are medical, to be clear. But a lot of people come in asking medical questions as recreational patients, but they're using it for the replacement of opioids, for replacement of anxiety medication, for the replacement of insomnia treatments, because they're finding cannabis has more utility than a lot of pharmaceuticals with less side effects in a lot of ways.
So do you find, are there people who come in and only purchase like CBD products?
Yep.
And so without any THC, and so it's a different objective, if you will?
Oh, yes, 100%. We sell lots of strictly CBD only topicals and we actually have a pure CBD line in a lot of these stores for people who have restrictions against THC use in their workplace, right? So truckers, people who work for the state, people who have commercial licenses have no tolerance when it comes to THC. So we actually have specific products for CBD use that guarantees no THC, because that line is requested and needed by a lot of people who want topical pain relief. CBD is a great use for that, right? CBD has some anxiety measures as well. So there are large CBD, you know, edibles you can take, but they need to be just CBD because drug testing is still a thing, and commercial licenses do matter. And people come to us knowing that it's a cannabis store, yes, but they will also not be buying cannabis, ironically. So a lot of other stores, you will see that in gas stations and stuff. It's a field day. You know, there's mixes of THC, Delta-8, all these other products that claim to be CBD. And we're very proud of being able to identify and give people what they actually want to buy without actually failing a drug test later, right? It is a service that is not exclusively to get high. It is not to, you know, just to have fun. It is a medical store in a lot of ways, and we do more than just vending pure cannabis. Yes.
Thank you.
Supervisor White.
We received a communication that stated that these stores sell a beer bottle-sized edible that delivers 90% THC. Do these stores have such a product as that?
Will Adler, for the record, no, they do not. But I will say that as a fact, just because a 90% THC anything, let alone would be viscous enough to flow out of a bottle, right? It just gets stuck in there. But B, we have serving limits based upon who you are and what you're allowed to purchase. So per day, you're allowed to buy 1 ounce of marijuana in its flower form. You reduce that down to about 3/8 of a concentrate in any way. So a bottle full of concentrate would just be illegal to start, right? That's already too much, you know, to serve to one person in one setting. But we do have medical-based products that are exceeding the purchase limit for a recreational person. You can get a medical, applicator that is almost pure THC. It is Rick Simpson oil, but you have to have a medical marijuana card. You have to have a stated purpose. You basically have to have cancer to want to use this, because it is so concentrated, you will not be able to move. You'll be on a couch, but it is for basically end-of-life treatment, and for people who have chronic severe pain and need something that dose. But we restrict that to being a medical product only for that purpose, because that's not a recreational product. We're not going to give that to anybody to go home with, because that is something that would be classified as dangerous if any, you know, normal recreational user wanted to use it. I would state though that the perception of cannabis and our sales is not well known or not well received in a lot of places, but we take extreme pride too in only serving those who are supposed to be in our stores. A lot of perception is that we do, you know, get our products out there, or it's on the streets, or it's with children. Hardly ever or rarely. I mean, we communicate with Carson City Sheriff's Office or other agencies, because if packaging shows up, we're able to scan it, we're able to tell them who bought it, and we're able to identify who might have given it to a child, right? So maybe in the early days we saw a little bit, but a lot of products you see on the streets do not origin with us. In fact, almost none of them do. Sadly, there's still a thriving black market, but we strictly sell to the adults and those with medical cards, and we sell them what they want to have, because we're proud that we're able to identify what they're buying. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, is there any other zoning type questions? I don't see any. Well, we're gonna stick to locations. So I'll bring it back up to this board for discussion then, and action or motion or thoughts, or anybody want to jump in first? Supervisor Schutte?
This is a difficult one, and I absolutely understand people not wanting it in their area, and I appreciate that. The flip side is, though, is there are also people in the eastern corridor and the southern corridor who would also not want it in their area, and now that the city can have up to 4 dispensaries, to close off the north corridor because some people don't want it is in essence saying, well, then we're going to give potentially more stores in east and south area. And so there lies the dilemma for me. So I'm sorry we have over 2 now, or potentially. I was hoping to keep it at 2, but now it is up to 4. And so I think we need to, if we introduce this motion on first reading, I would have to be sure that it is strictly section 5 and 6 and not 7 or 8. And I know it's 7 isn't listed on there, but on the sections, there's that little corner in 7, and so that's why I'm mentioning that.
Right.
There's that tiny little square, yeah.
So for the clarity of the record, I think Supervisor Schutte, what you're suggesting is limiting it to north of Nye Lane?
Yes.
Okay. And I think we can figure out townships and ranges when we're looking at a different scale.
When you bring it back on a second reading, they can conform it.
What's wrong with saying no 7 and 8? I'm confused. It seems pretty clear to
Will
me.
and I are disagreeing on the numbers right now, so I think because at this scale, it's difficult to read. So if we say that if the motion is we're excluding all areas south of Nye Lane, that's clear to me, and then we can amend the ordinance appropriately.
That's certainly our intent.
Yeah, the
is to
intent
say
is to limit it,
nothing-
everything south of Nye Lane eliminate, and north of Nye Lane, but south of Medical Parkway to include, if that is correct.
Right.
Yes, I would agree to that.
And
yes.
then we'll let the legalese look at the magnifying glass and determine the proper way to write this. I like street names better, like you said, than all these townships and sections, and I think they're clearer for the public when we're stating the area that is to be excluded. And so I think I'm already on the record. I agree with Supervisor Schutte that the discussion becomes, do I want to concentrate 3 in one area and none somewhere else? That doesn't. So are we saying only one area of town gets marijuana and nowhere else does? And I think concentrating them all in the same area can bring some of the things the public might be concerned about, right? Versus spreading them out, which then you don't have the impacts, the community impacts. And I think it's also important. I appreciated the testimony today from the public that said one lived on Bryce and said, I don't want it there. Well, when the specific application comes in, then that's where it's special conditions and uses and all the things that that individual may be concerned about certainly could be addressed and should be addressed if it came to that area. And then the other one was the general comment of why do we want this with our kids? I think none of us up here want this with our kids. I don't think there's a single one of us. These stores are not allowed to sell to children. Doesn't mean that I don't think it gets to children. I'm not that naive or stupid. There are parents that, well, I will call them stupid, are stupid enough to let their children have those drugs. But again, I don't live in their households and I don't make those decisions. The stores themselves are not allowed to sell to children. And so this is a zoning decision. And that's simply all it is. Is a store allowed in this area? And that's really all we're doing here today. The rest will all be handled through its normal course. And so, I don't know. That's where I'm at on this one, but I certainly don't want the area south of Nye Lane. I think that's heavily concentrated, and I don't even want to let it go to a special use permit for discussion, because I think already I don't believe it's an area we want to advertise a retail store.
I think I can't make the findings if it's south of Nye Lane.
Right. Anybody else? Supervisor White?
I'll go.
Okay.
So on, for board discussion anyway. So on page 635, it calls out 18.02.075, paragraph 5. And that says the applicant will provide adequate information, proof, and persuasion. I have to say, I am not persuaded. The idea of no viable locations, while I appreciate the difficulties that you have found in locating a place to put your store, a store anybody would want to, I get that. Sometimes making things happen is pretty difficult. The idea that clustering is not a workable situation. I will point out the Carson Mall. Stores cluster together because they in fact do create foot traffic. If you look at that at the Carson Mall, within the Carson Mall property itself, there are 6 food and beverage establishments. Absolutely neighboring that property, there are 7. If you add the Black Bear Diner which is a pretty short walk from there, there are 14 food and beverage establishments clustered together, all apparently doing pretty well. If you look at the corner of Hot Springs and Carson City, there are 6 food establishments clustered all together. Clustering does work if you have the right marketing. I don't find proof or persuasion that leads me to believe that this should be approved. Secondarily, I have taken the position, since I've been on this board, that zoning changes outside of a master plan review are something that I'm not interested in. And that's where I'm at on this proposal.
Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in? We're all gonna have to do it, so you might as well. Supervisor Horton, you can say why you're in favor of as is, as potentially amended, whether you're against. I mean, it's simply we need to move along, and we're gonna have to we have to make a decision.
Well, I'll tell you exactly where I am. I don't support marijuana, the use of marijuana, and have no interest in supporting it in any way. And I have no intention of voting to approve this.
Okay? No, that's exactly what each and every person's supposed to do. Supervisor Giomi?
I'm just waiting for a motion.
Mayor?
I can make one if you'd like me to.
When the motion comes, if the motion is for denial, if the.
I know what to
thank
do.
you.
Thank you. So, does that mean we're ready for a motion? Supervisor Giomi, if you want to make a motion. And if your motion is for denial, please indicate which findings you're not making.
I move to deny the application on the basis that I'm unable to make the required finding in item 2, compatibility.
I have a motion. Is there a second? I have a motion and a second to indicate that we will deny the application based on the inability to make finding number 2. That is, the proposed amendment will provide for land uses that are compatible with existing adjacent land uses and will not have a detrimental impact to other properties in the vicinity. On discussion, anyone? Nope. Then we'll, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Let the record reflect it was unanimous. Thank you. Tough, just no easy answers. Thank you. Okay, we're gonna try to go ahead. Is everybody okay if we just move right through and then we'll take the break between our board and health? Everybody okay? All right. With that, we'll move on to agenda item 15A, discussion and possible action regarding coordination of the legislative activity on our state legislation before the Nevada legislature. Mr. Wood, would you give us our briefing for this one?
I will do my best, but I'm recovering from the same cold that everybody else is, so bear with me.
There you go.
Madam Mayor, I have a list of, Stephen Wood for the record, I have a list of bills that I will go over, and then we can have board discussion after, or would you like me to take them one at a time?
Why don't you, let's do each bill at a time and
Okay.
see if we want to take action. So
Sounds good.
discuss a bill and then we'll see if we want action on it. Go ahead.
That sounds good. I'm going to be jumping around with bill numbers because I did include the list that Supervisor White brought up at the last meeting, so I'll be jumping around with bill numbers a little bit. So I'm going to start with SB 54. This bill is from the Secretary of State's office, and it requires the Secretary of State to create an elections manual, to create a uniform elections process across the state. That manual would go to each of the clerks and registrars across the state, and they would be required to comply with that manual. For your information, that bill is going to be heard today in Senate Legislative Operations and Elections Committee at 3:30. I'm open for discussion or if there are any questions on this bill.
Does any Supervisor Giomi?
Yeah, I'd like to know what our clerk recorder thinks about it, since it's going to affect him. And I personally think there's some issues with it. I think it's contrary to the expanded Dillon allowances that local governments received 2 or 3 sessions ago. I feel like it's the state taking more control than they need. That's my personal opinion relative to elections. So, but I'm not the election administrator, so I'd love to hear what Mr. Hone has to say.
Yeah, Scott Hohen for the record. The election clerks feel the same way, but we're going to let it play out based on testimony today. I'm told that it's more procedures for them to follow in terms of when we have to submit reports, when reports are generated, when we submit reimbursement, for monies. So I'm told that it's more at a higher level, their office, their controls, not ours. They don't know. They don't have a clue on what we do locally, and they can't control what we're doing locally. There's some legislation that's going through the channel right now about the top-down voter registration and controlling voter rolls. That's a whole different angle. This one is just them trying to put the little manual together. So we'll see. Be interesting to see what they say today.
Okay. Supervisor White?
Yeah, I share the concern that Supervisor Giomi brought up, but to reiterate even further, Section 4 exempts the Elections Manual from the Administrative Procedures Act, which means there's no opportunity for the public to review this manual. The bill does say that it shall be submitted to the Attorney General, but the bill does not tell the Attorney General to do anything, even to acknowledge that they received it. And again, like Supervisor Giomi said, that one size does not fit all in our election procedures. So I would hope that this board, at least in its current form, opposes this bill.
I sometimes like to see what comes out of a first hearing, because oftentimes things are drafted not necessarily as intended. We've all seen things come, go, that's not what I asked for. So I think that we should allow this particular bill to have its hearing today. And then based on those results, that you would bring it back for us to be able to take a position if it doesn't purport to turn out the way that Mr. Hohen believes it's going to turn out.
Right.
Because I agree with you and Stacy that if it's what we think it is, we don't like it. But if it's what Mr. Hohen says and it's purely just their own internal procedures, then so I think we should keep this on the list for discussion before this board and could bring it to the next meeting if it didn't go as anticipated.
Can we ask Stephen to advocate for removal of Section 4?
Section
Whether
4?
it's, no matter what form it ends up taking, there should be public scrutiny. There should be those checks and balances.
Yeah. Mr. Hohen, are you attending the hearing?
I am.
So I think for me, it would be best that the clerk, recorders, clerk treasurer, depending on again,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
title you have in which location, that I agree with Supervisor White, but feel it best it come from that arena that you request that removal of Section 4. There may be something in there that's confidential in a processing, but I'd like, again, to hear what that is on the record that would exempt it from the Administrative Act.
Yeah, be happy to. And just so everybody knows, I mean, this was written by the Secretary of State, the previous Secretary of State, Sagaski, and Mr. Aguilar is promoting it as well. And like I say, the Deputy Director is doing a presentation today, so we'll see what they say.
Okay, because I agree again overall with Mr. White, but I prefer our elections information to come from Mr. Hohen. Everybody okay with that?
I'm good with that, yeah.
Yeah,
You're good with that?
I will continue to monitor the bill
you.
and I'll watch the hearing today and if there's anything of importance, I'll work with our clerk and bring it back to the board.
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, what's the next one?
SB 22. This bill is, it's a committee bill from NACO. This bill was actually heard yesterday, and we did, in consultation with the city manager and the mayor, testify administratively in support of the bill. And when I explain what it is, you'll understand why. The bill allows for the electronic publication of notices to coincide with print publication. One of the issues that was brought up at the last meeting by Supervisor White was the issue of what happens if a website goes down. I want to let you know that that NACO proposed an amendment that clarifies that issue and says that as long as all the other boxes are checked in this process, that it was published online, will be published in the print paper as well, and then the website goes back up, that we're held harmless and that the timeline doesn't start over, so everything will continue even if there is a website outage. So staff would recommend that the board also take a position of support for this bill. I know Supervisor Giomi is very familiar with this, sitting on NACO, and we believe it's a good bill for all local governments, including Carson City.
Do we want to anyone want to do a motion for support for SB 22?
Yeah, I move to support SB 22 as amended by NACO at their last testimony.
Second.
I have a motion and a second for support of SB 22 as amended. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. Motion carried. Thank you. The next bill, please.
Okay, so next we're going to go to Assembly Bill 143. This was also brought up at the last meeting, I believe. This is about federal lands transfers and then how the deeds are dealt with afterwards. In speaking with staff and their analysis, this would not have any impact on Carson City currently because the federal lands that are transferred are patented, and this bill deals with other types of transfers, more specifically the types that have happened in counties like Story County. So our staff has decided that there's no real impact to Carson City. However, it could potentially, maybe in the future, allow for additional flexibility. But as it currently is written, there's no impact on the city.
Were you able to get to the bottom of why one of these properties would need to be disposed of without going through the ordinary channels, the way public properties are supposed to be disposed?
So the information that I have right now relates to specifically Story County, which is where the impetus of this bill comes from, because they built their townships on top of federal land. That land had to be transferred, but it wasn't patented. So there was confusion about how that land was transferred from federal government to county to private landowner. So it seeks to clarify that process and make it easier.
To clear their titles.
Correct.
So I actually heard a presentation on this from Story County, and so they have had businesses or things that have been on these properties for many years. They get ready to sell their business and they can't clear their titles. So I think it's really specific legislation to allow for all the cleanup of these old title problems that they're having.
One of the issues, if I could, that they were having, the way it's currently written, everyone would have to physically be present in the same room at the same time to sign all of the documents.
Right, which you
It
can't
is one
do.
of the issues that they're
Okay.
trying to fix. So it's very antiquated process that they're trying to bring into the modern era, I guess, for
So-
lack of a
And
better
clear
term.
So
these
while this
times.
was generated out of Story County, this bill's not specific to Story County, though. Okay,
That's correct.
okay, I get it.
Yeah, so I don't think we need a position, but we're not. It
I
doesn't
can,
impact
all right,
us.
I can move
Okay.
on. All right.
Next.
The next one is Assembly Bill 95, also mentioned at the last meeting. This bill is an interesting one. This was the one sponsored by Assemblyman Orentlicker that requires all candidates for public office to submit a petition of candidacy to the clerk's office, as well as their traditional filings. So this bill was heard on February 22nd in Assembly Legislative Operations and Elections Committee. It has not been scheduled for a work session. Just to let you know, as far as our clerk's office, they have put a fiscal note on this bill of $100,000 for additional staff required to handle the extra workload that this would require.
Are there any other fiscal notes besides Carson City?
Let me look really quickly.
While you're looking up with the fiscal notes, what's the purpose of this? I think I need a little bit more. What are they trying, what is the certificate of candidacy? What's that mean? I gotta have 1,000 people?
Petitions, yeah, for both.
How many? I mean, what's the
I think it's
purpose?
1% of they want nonpartisan offices as well as partisan offices to have a petition in order for you to run for office, number one. Number two, they want to get this done during the February presidential preference primary election, that we want to do this at the exact same time. So we want to do a petition, verify signatures, as well as run an election. That's why the fiscal note on our part. And all of the counties that testified at the hearing, Washoe, Clark, Story, they're all no on that.
So it was all opposition. What was the bill's sponsor? What's the purpose? What's the benefit, supposedly? What's
Right.
bringing this to light?
From my understanding, and in my opinion, it's a bit unclear, but I think the idea is more citizen participation in who runs for office. That it's trying to generate more grassroots efforts around candidates running for office.
I think it would do the opposite.
Well,
Yeah, it
and
would
I
do the
think,
exact- I mean,
I-
right now, anyone who wants to run can literally file and run without anything but a filing fee.
Right.
Now they've got to put
$100.
in a huge effort to go and get signatures to get their name on the ballot. It's
The sponsor thinks it's going to level the playing field. The people that had testimony were saying it almost protects incumbents that have
say
the
that.
resources and
Well,
contacts.
it definitely protects incumbents, but look, it's hard enough to run for office
Yeah.
and to serve. Making it harder for people to run to office does not make sense to me.
So what I've heard is that now that others, if we can call them that, people that are not Republican or Democrat, are now north of 30% of registered voters in Carson City. Those people already have to do a petition to run in a partisan race. Minor parties and unaffiliated people already have to produce a petition that they have support to get on the ballot. And since they are now 30%, the idea is everybody should have to do it.
Well, I didn't think of it from that perspective because we're all sitting in nonpartisan positions.
Yeah, we don't have that
So,
issue here.
which is the way I think it should be, but that's a whole nother story.
To your point, Supervisor Gielmi, about making it harder and benefiting incumbents, the bill does also allow for, which was previously unallowable, it allows for the use of campaign monies that have been fundraised and collected to be used for the petition itself and the collecting of signatures, which was previously unallowable.
Yeah.
The second
Well, again,
point,
that benefits incumbents because
right,
the only
to your
ones that
point.
have
who
money.
are just running don't have any money yet.
To your point, that's exactly why I
So-
brought that
Already
up.
have a bankroll.
Yeah.
I also
Not a lot,
wanted to mention that this has not been scheduled for a work session. It was heard over a week ago. I have not heard
In and of itself.
of any movement on this bill. I think to the clerk's point, there was strong testimony in opposition. But I will continue to monitor it
Okay.
no matter what the board decides to do today. I'll be watching it as I know our clerk will as well.
Okay. Next one.
Okay. This next one is Assembly Bill 104. This is sponsored by Assemblywoman Dickman from Sparks and co-sponsored by our own Assemblyman PK O'Neill. Excuse me. This is a very simple bill. Actually, it gives cities an additional BDR for the sole purpose of amending their charter. Specifically for Carson City, the impact would be we would get an additional BDR in addition to our one and only BDR that we get every session, essentially allowing us to have more full conversations about other parts of the NRS that we would wish to change. This bill is scheduled for a hearing this afternoon in Assembly Legislative Operations and Elections, and it would be staff's recommendation that we support this measure.
We should support this. Does anyone want, let me just double check. I only see Robin, if there's ever any public comment on any piece of legislation, just wave at me. Okay, I just want to let you know you're welcome to chime in, but I don't want to stop at every single, just give me a high sign that you want to talk about it. Okay.
Scott's still public, so he
He
can
never
weigh in
does
too.
any public
I know,
testimony,
but he
but you know.
could, you know.
Okay,
He is a member of the public.
there you go. Okay, I'll count you.
But just didn't want you to diss him, you know.
Give me a thumbs up if you need us. Okay, I'll accept a motion
I'll move to approve AB 104
to support.
to support, sorry.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, AB
Actually,
104,
you'd
you
have to
can,
be in the legislature to actually approve it, but
there you go. Okay, do you have another one to bring
I have a
forward?
few more, yes. The next one is AB 60. This is a League of Cities bill. It was presented yesterday in Assembly Government Affairs. This bill allows for a more streamlined process for the update of the assessment rolls for neighborhood improvement districts. So currently, as you all know, we every year have to approve a new ordinance to update those assessment rolls. This bill, if it passes, would allow us to do it by resolution, essentially amending the original ordinance. It still has notification requirements to the landowners within the district, still checks those boxes, but it allows us to do it by resolution as opposed to going through the entire ordinance process annually. So
Over and over and over
yeah,
again.
it was heard yesterday. There were minimal questions from the committee. I believe this bill will probably move forward, but it is also our recommendation that the board support this measure.
I'll do that. It's a League of Cities bill, so I'm just double checking for any thumbs up, Scott. Okay. So I move to support AB 60.
Second.
Motion in a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say no. Let the record reflect it was unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, just a couple more, I swear.
So he says.
Yeah,
Okay.
unless you have more for me. SB 11, this is another League of Cities bill. This bill allows for the use of drones for building and fire inspection purposes. It requires the Department of Public Safety to adopt regulations that because they govern the use of drones throughout the state. So this bill would require them to adopt regulations for local governments to use drones to, look at roofs, do fire inspections, do building inspections, that sort of thing. It wouldn't require the use of drones. It would just require that the regulations are there that enable us to do it. So I'll leave this one up to the board's discretion, but since this is a League of Cities bill, I wanted to bring it up.
Supervisor
Just,
Giovanni?
just a curiosity, and I haven't reviewed this bill. Does this fall under the commercial controls of drones that falls under the FAA, which requires pilots, co-pilots, flight plans? There are a
Nothing
myriad of restrictions where the drones cannot fly. Has there been any discussion about
My-
all of that?
My understanding, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but the regulations that the Department of Public Safety has adopted are required to comply with those other standards.
Correct.
It's not in the bill, but you can't, you would be in violation of federal law if you operated it otherwise. So
Okay.
I don't think it needs to be in the bill is my
Right.
point.
Right,
Right.
like those
regulation itself
regulations
covers
are already required to fall under those standards.
Okay.
It just
It's
is
a-
an expanded use to let us use our drones to do inspections, not for any other purpose. It can't be
So-
given to law enforcement, blah, 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 blah.
Well, I would argue that an inspection is a law enforcement activity. I guess, I guess my concern is that right now when we collectively, the government, is inspecting a facility, there's knowledge that that facility is getting inspected. I just have a concern that this would be that much easier to conduct an inspection without the knowledge of the property owner. And that's the concern that I have. I
No,
think
they have to
that
call for their inspection.
they actually don't. They don't. So a fire inspection, or the Nevada State Fire
never
Marshal, for
mind.
instance,
Fire
can do a fire
inspections.
inspection
Their annuals. Okay.
without announcing that they're coming. If there's something related to a building construction, yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Okay.
And I can see that there would be instances where, like a high-rise in Vegas, where you would have the huge benefit.
Right.
My concern with it is that I believe there should be a notification to the property owner that it's happening, as opposed to just having this drone show up and fly into your business's enclosed backyard or in fenced area.
But that can be
That's
granted in the
the kind
regulation.
of concern I have.
Mhm.
I'd like to hear what Jason thinks about that. Do you mind? Did you hear what I said? Do you care to comment? Do you just wanna, did I put you on the spot? Well, I knew I put you on the spot, but
They can do
that's
that.
why we love you, Jason.
I have no comment. I don't know. I haven't really reviewed that. It's obviously a valid concern.
I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just overthinking.
doing the
it.
regulation.
I just think about the times that we've went and done fire inspections and in years past, and it is an enforcement action. It is an enforcement action. You're enforcing laws. You're enforcing a fire code, which is an ordinance and it's a law. And you could see things on that inspection that are additionally illegal. And to just allow this drone to go up and start, spying around your backyard, business's backyard, concerns me. So.
But when fire department shows up to do an inspection, they necessarily alert the business before they enter. So
Yeah, that's my
wouldn't-
point. That's my point. I
So-
would want to
so-
make sure they would do that in this case. I don't know that they wouldn't, but I guess I'm just saying that it's a little bit, if you're going to go into a business, physically go into a business, it's impossible for you to go into that business without them knowing you're there.
Right.
My point is, with this, you could be parked half a block away and be doing 5 businesses at one time with none of them knowing that you're there. So that's my concern. I think it's without that, there needs to be notice, in my opinion.
So if I could, this bill is not scheduled for a hearing at this time, so I will continue to monitor it, and as it progresses, I'll bring it back.
Yeah, I'm not against it. I just,
Okay.
Well, I think the drone's a great idea, but.
No,
But I'd like your thoughts on that there
it's-
should be notice.
Yeah, it's simple enough to go knock on the door and say, hey, we're going to be doing the inspection. It's going to include an aerial survey. I don't even think they need to have permission. Just think they need to have notice.
Got it.
Stacy,
Handled in the regulation that's required in this anyway. But
You're right, it could be. And
Right.
maybe,
I gotta remember, I can't remember it on the existing ones, whether they already have, I can't remember,
I
so
don't know.
we'll
I
look at
don't-
it,
yeah.
right?
So during a fire inspection, is the business owner walking alongside or?
yes, generally,
Right.
they don't always, it's up to them.
And
But generally, they walk alongside.
Well, you almost have to, because.
Maybe they'll fly alongside.
Right, well, that right there is one of the issues that so I agree with you, because with an inspection, then there's that opportunity to discuss the problem right then and there. And you're in the moment and you're looking at the issue, so.
I think there's ways to, I mean, obviously, you would need to share what you viewed with them afterwards, but I think it's a great idea. There's a lot of instances that I can see where it can be very viable, and you can, someone has a huge yard, like Pick and Pull is an example, that it would take hours to walk it. So I think it's a great idea. I just think they need to just not do it without telling them that they're there, that's all.
Okay.
Anyway, keep it in mind.
I'll
and
continue
we'll
to
go
monitor
from there.
and bring
Thank
it
you.
back if there's.
Sorry,
any
didn't
progress.
mean to go
No.
down Alice's rabbit hole.
Yes, I did. Go ahead.
The last bill that I wanted to bring up before I give you an update on our charter bill is AB 20. Excuse me. This bill is an administrative bill. It's a committee bill, and it will open up the account to finance the construction of treatment works and the account for the revolving fund for sewer connection projects, as well as other local water projects. Our staff has reviewed the bill and is very supportive of it. There are a lot of different reasons why the legislature is pushing for this. There's obviously a lot of water concerns in southern Nevada, but it opens it up statewide. There are potential benefits for our own sewer connection projects in the state, and we would recommend that we support this bill.
Does it give access potentially to our southeast sewer
That's the point.
connection?
It
Because I know
could, yes.
currently under all the rules, we can't help those residents at all, but this one might give us an opportunity.
It's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity.
It's not a guarantee, but it's an
If we
opportunity.
can help them, I want to help them.
Mhm.
I mean, I think if we can help them, it's a super expensive one. That's why we saved it for last. Because it's difficult terrain, so,
I'll
everybody
do a
o-
motion if you want.
okay. I'm looking, I
move
need
to
one
support,
second. Go
move to
ahead.
support AB 20.
Second.
A motion and a second to support AB 20. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and now our charter bill.
Okay, so just really quickly, SB 16, our charter bill, was heard last week in Senate Government Affairs. Our district attorney and myself presented the bill. Nancy was in the audience, probably making faces at us. The hearing went well. We did have a few questions, and we are getting back to the committee with answers to those questions. The questions were about the realignment of ward boundaries. So there may have been a little bit of confusion, but we're clarifying those questions and getting back to the committee. I have a meeting with the chair of the committee today, so I'm hoping that we can get this bill moved to a work session and get it moving through the process. But hearing went well, and I have no doubt that the bill will move forward.
We have the information ready to present to the chair? That was requested? We're good?
Jason Woodbury, District Attorney. Yes, and I'll bite my tongue a little bit here because the questions that were presented had nothing to do with the amendments that we proposed.
Yeah, that's what I
They
was
had to
asking.
do with
Existing
existing language. We're prepared to answer the questions, though.
Well, isn't that the danger anytime you open up a chapter or a
course.
thing? It's like not what I wanted to talk about, but okay.
So I've learned.
All right, yeah.
I still struggle with why any legislator would fight a local government who's had public hearings to amend their own charter, which is their charter.
Okay.
That's just a side comment, but probably. Anyway, thanks.
Okay, anybody else? All right, well,
All
let's
right.
get that one done.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right. We're now on agenda item 16, which is our non-action items. Ms. Paulson, anything to share with us?
I just wanted to again thank Public Works for all the work they're doing to clear the roads. I was at the office, I don't know, it was a little past 6, and I kept hearing beeping sounds, and I was like, somebody's out there doing something. So I walked out, and they had crews everywhere trying to clean up, get all the snow off the roads in the downtown area. So, and it was really cold outside. So I just want to thank them once again.
Okay. Anybody else have anything that needs to share? We're good? Okay, we will have a closed, non-meeting, I don't like those words, a closed session with our management representative and council at the end of the Board of Health agenda item. Do I have any final public comment? Now both publics left. This is for the Board of Supervisors. Yes, because then you're going to take over as the Board of Health. I'm not coming back into session.
I don't know if we did for the private meeting. Go ahead, sorry.
You're all right. I just announced whether we're having one or not. So if there's no objections, no final public comment, just one last time. Okay, then we are adjourned as the Board of Supervisors, and we'll be back as the Board of Health within about 8 minutes. Just enough time for us to use the facilities. Thank you.
Board of Health meeting to order. Mr. Hone, would you call roll, please?
Vice Chair Giomi. Member Bagwell. Member Furlong. Member Horton. Member Shute.
Here.
Member White.
Here.
We have a quorum.
All right, yeah, can you just mention that Chair is not?
Chair Lyons, not present.
Okay. And we wish her our best. Understand she's got some property issues she's dealing with, so we hope she's doing well. Public comment? Is there any comment from the public? All right, seeing no public, we'll move to item 22, which is approval of the meeting minutes for the December 15th meeting. Are there any changes or corrections? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
I move to approve the minutes of December 15th, 2022.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, motion passes. Item 23A is for possible action, discussion, and action regarding the proposed acceptance of the report from the Carson City Health Officer. You have that in your packet. Obviously, she can't report beyond what's in there, but I think we should go ahead and accept the report unless anyone has any questions about it. Maybe Nikki could answer them. If not, I would entertain a motion.
I move to accept the report as presented.
Motion and a second by Curtis Horton. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, motion passes. Item 23B is discussion possible action regarding a proposed acceptance of the report of the CCHHS Director. Ms. Aker, you are up.
Thank you, Vice Chair. For the record, Nikki Aker, Director of Carson City Health and Human Services. And you have in your packet the comprehensive report, so a lot more information than what I'm going to go over today. I am going to focus in on those asks that, or the request of the Board of Health. And absolutely, if you have additional questions, happy to answer anything. So these are my requests for the Board of Health. So under access to care, our Title X funding ends March 31st, 2023, which is a loss of nearly $300,000 a year. You all have been aware of this. I've been talking about it for some time. We are going to get a grant from the state that I will be bringing to the Board of Supervisors to assist us to filling that gap so that we can still take care of our community members and our patients. So my request to the Board of Health is to continue to advocate for Title X funding for Northern Nevada at the federal level and accept the comprehensive reproductive grant from the state of Nevada. Keep going?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
if we have any questions, or we'll just jump right in.
Perfect. Okay, my next item is workforce challenges. I was just at a meeting in Washington, D.C. with the National Association of City and County Health Officials. This is not a problem that is just centered around us. It's across the country. But right now, we have 3 very hard positions to fill. The public health nurse. If you remember, we had asked for a bilingual public health nurse, and we have dropped that requirement of bilingual. We do have staff that can translate, plus we have a translation service. Also an epidemiologist. That is one of the positions you approved when we split environmental health and epidemiology. And a public health preparedness division manager, which my public health preparedness division manager is now my deputy, so we're trying to fill her position. And my request to the Board of Health is to reach out to your constituents and contacts to let them know that we have these job opportunities and have them apply at carson.org. Public health funding. We are looking at it as a state, and it's also being looked at nationally as well. I don't have to tell you, legislation session has started. There's one public health funding bill, SB 118. So this bill was introduced on February 16th in the Senate Health and Human Services and received a due pass. In the 2019 legislative session, there was a creation of a public health improvement fund, but that money was not in the governor's budget, so it was unfunded. So we're hoping to get that funded this year. It's an item we've been working on for 6 years. And what the funding suggested in this bill is to be non-categorical, meaning that it will let us take care of the priorities that we have. So if, like with the loss of Title X funding, if we had non-categorical funding, then it could be used for that type of thing. Or you're going to hear next about our community health needs assessment. It can be worked on those projects. So it's community specific.
And it's essentially unrestricted in the community, in the public health environment.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can I ask?
Certainly.
It
Can you?
has the money on the bill or doesn't?
It does have the money on the bill. It's
Is or is not in the budget?
it's not yet.
Not yet.
It's not in the
They're
governor,
worried-
it's not in
they're
the
working-
executive budget.
Yeah, they're
it's up to the
working on it.
yeah. It's up to the
Yes.
legislature to find the money.
Yeah, yep. And that is 15 million for each year, so a total of 30 million.
Statewide.
Statewide,
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
not Carson City.
God, that would be
That would be
wonderful,
amazing.
wouldn't it?
It's
I wouldn't
it's
know
a-
what to do with that much.
I believe it's proposed as a $5 per capita. Isn't
It
that
is
what
five.
it is?
It's
Yeah.
$5 per capita. And Nevada is tied with Wisconsin for last of state public health funding. This may get us up to about 47th. So the median is about 119 per person, and we right now are at 72 per person. The ask is $5 per person to be spent on public health. And the return on investment is for every $1 spent on public health, it returns $5.60. So we were able to, Stephen did testify in support of this bill, and I'm just asking for continued support. Homelessness. Our community we don't have a lot of data surrounding homelessness. And we know that every year the point in time count that's conducted in January is not a true count of the individuals. And so the Community Management Information System, or CMIS, it's used throughout the state for putting in information about the homeless that come in for services. And they are going to be releasing a module that can be used for our street outreach program. And this will help us map where homeless encampments are and identify who's in those camps. And then we'll be able to follow the individual from the camps to permanent housing. And there is an example in your packet of what it looks like. So my request is to continue to support the Carson City Housing Plan, especially as we work to get a contractor for street outreach.
Nikki, are there any comments relative to that? Go ahead, Supervisor Schutte, or Member Schutte, whatever you are.
On this, the Community Management Information System, so that is throughout the state, correct?
Correct.
Do some of the supportive nonprofits have access to that information initially, or does it have to be forwarded?
So it depends on if they have the grant or not that is within this program. So not all of them may have it.
Okay.
But
They can be given, I will tell you, they can be given access to it because we have access to it in Southern Nevada, and it's a requirement of the city of Las Vegas.
Okay.
If you're providing services either through a grant that they provide or through a facility that they provide to provide input into the CMIS. And I
great.
want to make that a requirement of the grants that we put out there, then that's what I wanted to ask you. So I want to make sure that those agencies that we granted funds to participate in this process.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean that, and I mean, I think we said that to Mariana. I
Mhm.
made that a part of my motion, so I'll challenge you to make sure that happens, since you'll be seeing those and
Yes.
interacting, because I think it's vital.
Yeah, otherwise it's incomplete
It
data.
is incomplete,
Right,
and you don't have
right.
data, and that's the problem. We don't have data right now,
Mhm.
and the more we don't have data, the longer we're gonna be kicking the problem down the road. At least if we get good data, we can begin to formulate a plan to address some of the issues. you know?
Right, and this goes further into, like you indicated, we do have CMIS now, but it just tracks who has come in for services and where they have gotten services before. So we can tell, okay, they were in Vegas a year ago and they got services, but this is gonna go even further. So that, and what's really nice about this is it will look and tell us, well, how many apartments do we need? How many
Yes.
one bedroom, how many two bedrooms do we need? So it's gonna help us
I think the
plan.
key is going to be for you guys to make sure you manage the system so that you have good procedures for
Mhm.
good data in, because you can't pull data out if you don't have a process to put good data in. So I
Yeah.
guess that's what I would challenge you to make sure that as you're setting that up and you're requiring NOTs to provide input, that they do it in a manner that you prescribe.
Right.
So that it isn't done one way by them and a different way by Ron Wood.
Yes, and Mary Jane has already been working on
Great.
what that form looks like and what data we need to put in there.
That's great.
In the section that deals with one bedrooms, two bedrooms, all of that, can you look or verify that the individual that they're taking the information from, that they want the housing? That was one of the things, not just, okay, he's single, she's single, has two kids, whatever. Would you add or verify on there that the particular client has indicated they would accept housing?
Okay.
Because not all that we think in our lives should take or would want housing want it. And so I just look to want to see the ratios, because again, the better data we collect on the front end. So what I don't want to do is say we need 69 one-bedroom apartments, but the reality is only 50 would
Are gonna-
accept one. Anyway, I
Yes.
would appreciate that. If there's ever an opportunity, I don't know about anyone else, to have some time to just look through the CMIS report so we can see the data elements, it would be helpful.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
Nikki, how do you, this was a struggle for us with HIPAA issues. So how have you, do you do BAAs? How do you?
So.
So you're not putting HIPAA in there beyond the fact that they may have sought medical assistance.
Right, so
right?
we
it
are
would
not,
just say,
we're not putting any diagnoses in
Right.
there.
so it would just say
we're-
sought services from Carson City Public Health Nurse, and that would be the end of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no, we don't want to deal with HIPAA in this
Yeah, okay, good.
aspect.
can I add one more quick question? So kind of piggybacking on what Member Bagwell just said in terms of the want. This might be getting too much into the weeds, but then data in terms of able to retain housing. So they want, then they're placed, but are they then able to retain it or maintain it? And is that process creating other difficulties? Which then brings to mind the importance of the wraparound services, but also, but each situation treated as an individual situation.
Correct. Now, I don't know if that's in this module, but that's something we already look at because we have a community health worker that works with our housing clients. I don't know if you remember many years ago, I came with that program, and it was something that was a little different, putting it in human services. But we realize that for a individual to be successful in housing, they have many other issues and barriers to take care of, and we want to help them work through that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, go on, Nikki. Thank you.
Okay, our community health improvement plan. So we've completed our community health needs assessment. We did that in collaboration with the hospital. So our next step is to convene a diverse and engaged stakeholder group to review the data and findings. And we want to look for existing and new partners that we can identify, along with resources available to work on those priority areas for our community, and as well as identifying gaps and overlaps that we may see in resources and services. And as a collaborative group, a plan of action known as the CHIP, or the Community Health Improvement Plan, will be developed to address those matters for the improvement of our health within our community. So I'm just asking for the Board of Health members to assist in identifying and recruiting stakeholders to participate in this collaborative group. You can refer them to me at my email address with CHIP in the subject line, or if you know of someone that I need to reach out to, I'm happy to do that. So we want to get as diverse group as we can, and as well as the public.
And I really appreciate the inclusion of identify overlaps. And I say this every time, but I hate to see resources wasted because there is that overlap when that energy can be put toward needs. So thanks.
Yes, we have limited resources. We need to work together. And then I'm just going to highlight, we did complete our after action report. I know some of you were a part of that. A contractor was hired to conduct that. We wanted an outside person and outside eyes to look at that. The process included surveys, conference calls, and we have a report that was provided to us, and we will start working on improvements that were identified and that can be addressed within our department. And that also fulfills one of our strategic plan goals. And then within the Human Services Division, the Nevada Housing Division conducted a program and fiscal review of our 4 housing programs, and we didn't have any findings or concerns. And so far, we've had a number of our grants audited this year, and we have come out well.
They're making up for lost COVID time.
Yeah. Congrats on that. That's no small accomplishment considering the number of grants.
Yeah.
Any questions for Nikki?
And if something comes up later, I'm happy to answer them.
All right.
So.
Are we moving on to the CHNA then?
You
All
want
right,
us to
I
accept
would
the report?
move, or I would accept a motion to accept the director's report as presented and with the comments on the record.
I
Is there a
second.
Second? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion carries. All right, we will move on to agenda item 23C, which is a discussion and possible action regarding the 3rd Community Health Needs Assessment of CCHHS, and a process by which to convene a stakeholder group to review the data and findings for the purpose of creating a community health improvement plan.
Don't show them the material before you ask them to participate. You'll scare them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, we just want a little bit of your time.
Yeah, send them a tiny section.
Yeah.
All right, Jeannie, are you going to take this?
I am, thank you.
All right, you have the floor.
Jeannie Freeman, Deputy Director for Carson City Health and Human Services. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today and discuss with you the 3rd Community Health Needs Assessment that we have been able to participate in. Each time we do one of these assessments, we find commonalities between them, and we also find new areas, right, that can help guide us into where we are headed. This Community Health Needs Assessment was actually completed by a contractor that was secured through Carson Tahoe Hospital and CTH, as well as Carson City Health and Human Services, served as co-leads in doing this process. It's important, the hospital does this on an every 3-year basis, and we have decided as an agency that it's a good idea, even though for reaccreditation or accreditation purposes, we're only expected to do it every 5 years, but it makes sense that since we partner with so many different entities and they use these assessments and they do them more frequently, for us to be doing them more frequently. It also helps us to gauge if there's something that's showing up rather rapidly in our community that needs to be addressed, that we can do so on a quicker in a quicker fashion. So this current community health needs assessment was done as a regional one. This is the first time that it's really been identified as a regional assessment, even though the other ones were conducted on a regional basis. Because if we even look at the name of our hospital, it's Carson Tahoe Regional Hospital, right? So they look as a facility for serving those. We know that a lot of people in our surrounding communities come into Carson for services, and we felt it was important for that to be part of that context. So this community health needs assessment was conducted from August to December of 2022. And I do have to say I'm extremely happy that a contractor was available to do this, because there's not a day in this world that I believe that we would have staff that would be able to have completed such a robust process in that amount of time to be able to help us to move forward. So community engagement is something that the Board of Health has always emphasized that we needed to make sure that we are doing as an agency, as well as what our partners are doing. You have highlighted it many times in your Board of Supervisors meetings, as well as at the Board of Health, that we need to have more engagement from our community partners and from the public in giving us their feedback. So some of the things that the contractor completed is they did 46 interviews, stakeholder interviews, from across the region, conducted 15 focus groups with more than 125 different participants. Those are some large focus groups. And if you've ever conducted a focus group, you know that just analyzing the data from focus groups can be quite challenging and time consuming. They did community surveys where we put out the web link for people to choose to participate in the survey. And we had over 1,500 responses. And then they did telephone surveys where they did cold calls. As you can see, the diversity, and I apologize, the text is very small, and there were more that weren't even on here, but you can only go so small before you just say it's too small, and we're there. So the organization and participation of different stakeholders within the focus groups and the interviews, quite diverse from around the region. We had our healthcare, we had government, non-government, for-profit, nonprofit, as well as different representatives from organizations that serve unique portions of our population. And then one of the best, I guess I shouldn't say that, not one of the best things, the whole thing is a good thing, but one of the newest things that we did that we haven't done previously in a community health needs assessment was an access audit. So we have seen previously that access to healthcare and being able to get into healthcare based on insurance or based on time frame has been a challenge. And one of the things that the contractor did is they did an access audit for healthcare providers and different entities around the region. So they did calls to identify whether or not people were able to get into healthcare, how long it would take them to get into an appointment, whether or not insurance was required, those types of things, which becomes very important for us when we start looking at how we can improve for our region. We found that all but one of the 24 facilities was actually accepting new patients. It may not be that you were able to get into the provider that you wanted. You may have been able to get into the facility, but not necessarily the provider that you wanted. And that's a pretty common practice for healthcare groups to be able to rotate through so that they can share patients and do those kinds of things as well. We found one of the biggest gaps that was identified was that not as many of our providers had the ability to speak Spanish, which is the second most common language within our area. And so even the phone tree with trying to get into making a phone call or getting into that practice, somebody who was not an English speaker may not be able to get connected to the services and know what buttons to push in order to get connected for those appointments.
Can I ask on that one?
Please.
Did a gap come up different for mental health providers versus general medical? Because I sure am hearing in the community that there aren't any mental health. How about there's just no service available, or see you in 6 months, which doesn't help when you're in crisis. But
So Member Bagwell, thank you so much for that question. Actually, the phone calls were made for those who were primary care.
Just
And primary care.
Okay.
But what you bring up is something that we'll take note of, because that is something for us to make sure that as we look at what the priorities were that came about with the community health needs assessment, that mental behavioral health became a piece of that. And that will be one of those things that we want to make sure that we're transcending across. If it's not happening in primary care, likely not happening in other areas. And we want to make sure that that's addressed
Okay,
as well.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I can tell you that the biggest challenge in the mental health world is providers.
Just there
It
aren't
is-
any?
It, as difficult as it is to recruit primary health care providers, it is 10 times more difficult to recruit licensed social workers, marriage and family therapists, psychologists. It is nearly impossible.
Is that a
There-
nationwide?
It is.
Yes. There are just
People
not
just aren't
enough.
going into the field?
No.
Ugh.
Well, not going into the field, and then there's also burnout associated with that. And then when you do have a shortage of providers, we have a shortage of primary care providers, but when you have a shortage of mental health, behavioral health providers, you have that burnout on an even greater level.
Right.
But then now we're talking, as you just mentioned, how do you find somebody even when you're in crisis? You can't necessarily wait. So
It ends up being like the ER equivalent on the mental health side. People end up in crisis and end up in some kind of on Kenny's radar because they haven't been able to access the sort of intervention that would help them avoid a crisis. And so, they get into crisis mode and they end up at Vital or at our what's the name of the company? Yeah, at Mallory or one of those similar locations, because they're in crisis.
And I just have to add, Nikki Aker, for the record, there is a bill from one of the regional behavioral health policy boards that's looking at that workforce, and they're trying to develop a workforce development center that can even start down in, the primary school and get them.
Well, and is there just, I don't know, you guys are in this every day, but is that one of the licensing boards or things we should be looking at for reciprocal things to be able to allow people to bring their license from other states
It is not as difficult.
for this group?
It is not difficult to license like LCSWs versus like a physician. It's relatively quick in my experience. I don't think that's the issue.
It's
I
just
think
the
issue
number.
No
is that
barriers
it's-
in our
well,
licensing?
and it's well, I'm not saying there aren't any, but I just don't think that's a huge issue. I think the issue is that it's a difficult role to fill because it's a difficult job to do. You're spending literally 8 to 10 hours a day listening to problems that people are having and trying to help them. It's really challenging to the work that these people do. I have a lot of respect for them. But as Jeannie said, there's a lot of burnout, and a provider can see anywhere between 3 and 4 patients an hour. A behavioral health specialist can maybe do 1 an hour, and it's hard. It's hard work, and I think that's the reason why people aren't going into it. They're compensated lower than medical providers. Even mid-level practitioners get paid more than, generally speaking, LCSW. So there's a lot that needs
Going
to
on
be
there.
fixed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So in looking what came out, there were 4 categories that really rose to the top, and there's a lot of different subsegments within each one of these. One of the things to keep in mind related to the data that came out of this entire process is that in these 4 categories, the issues within Carson, or that were identified specifically for Carson, because we were able to separate out each of the counties' data and look at that, fall within these categories as well. And some of those things that were identified for Carson City: access to safe, affordable housing, counseling services for mental health, both youth and adults, affordable prescription drugs. That was identified specifically in Carson that was an issue. Quality childcare, which is one that has come up, and we are seeing that more and more. Counseling services for the mental health for adolescents, livable wage job opportunities. as well as programs to help with drug and other substance abuse, not just in the treatment, but in the continuation so that we can keep individuals off from using drugs and other substances and keep them sustained. And as Member Schutte had mentioned earlier during Board of Supervisors, just also the sustainment of keeping people in our communities clean. So access to basic needs, mental, emotional health, access for healthcare for specific populations, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we move forward, and then that substance use. So access to basic needs, this goes back kind of to some of the things that we already are seeing go on in Carson City. We see our housing plan. We know that we are doing a lot of different work there, but wait times to be able to get into primary care. And for somebody who's uninsured or underinsured, 1 to 4 months to be able to get into a provider.
Who is the uninsured?
So we can have, so even though we
Just
have
asking who it is.
so even though we have the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, where there's a requirement for people to carry insurance, sometimes the insurance is more expensive than what the ding or the penalty is for not having the insurance. And so we have uninsured who can have, they can be working, and they could not be working full-time. They may be working multiple jobs in order to make their bills, but none of their employers provide the insurance based on the number of hours that they are working. They can be those who are yet fitting into what we might consider a middle income or a middle America kind of position, where they pay their rent, they've got a car, they've got different things, but they may not be able to afford the health insurance piece of it.
So none of those health insurances on the market plan are so inexpensive to give them basic coverage?
Well,
I thought some of them were really inexpensive.
To be honest, like I'm blessed that I don't have to go search for my health insurance on the marketplace, right? So I don't know what the access is.
I can
but
speak a little bit to that. I mean,
Please.
we have a person in our office who that is her sole job, is to get people linked up to, but there are people who fall into that category where they're either self-employed or
Not poor enough.
Correct.
Just
And so they make too much money. They don't. I can think of a lot of small businesses that have 3 or 4 employees, or maybe 5 employees. They don't offer health insurance because they're not required to, but yet they make too much money to qualify. And so they don't have insurance. And there are people who don't have insurance that just don't have insurance. But then there's the underinsured component of it, and a lot of the people even who have access through the portal to get coverage are underinsured because they have to meet a deductible, and the deductible is so high that an office visit is $100 or something because they're not in a plan, right? If you're in a plan, it's $30 or $40 to see primary care. If not, it might be as much as $120 or $180.
Okay.
So unless you're on a sliding fee scale, and then which is what FQHCs do, is offer a sliding fee scale even to underinsured people. So there's a lot more, I think, underinsured than you realize. Yeah, yeah. Some of the plans they're $6,000 deductibles, and if you're in a $32,000 a year job, that's 20% of your income before you even start having the insurance cover anything.
And then I'll just add, reality is you've got some of these single parent households, they're making the decision, do I feed my family? Do I get insurance?
Yeah.
So, they look at that priority to
you may have
them.
one family member in the house who has insurance because
the kids are $10.
Because because it's extra to cover the kids and it's extra to cover the spouse. So it's the wage earner that gets the insurance and the rest of the household doesn't.
So our access to basic needs, we're looking at our housing, we're looking at physical activities, social activities for that connectedness, prescription medications, to be able to have that. We know that we have heard stories about the costs of things such as insulin, EpiPens, those types of things. And we know that this is nationwide, this is a concern, and it's showing up in our community as well. So some of the comments, we've put some of those comments that have been made by people who participated in our stuff. So access to that safe and affordable housing. And I think that that's one of the things that Carson City has really been trying to take on, is not just the access to housing, but making sure that it's safe housing. And I know that you run through that debate on a regular basis. But as you can see that as the rents go up, that affordability, you know, a lot of times we hear that adage of we need affordable housing. What does affordability mean? And that's probably one of those things that we're going to need to address in that community health improvement plan, is a definition of affordability. And that's where that chart comes up that was identified. And this is across the United States during the period of time from 2016 to 2020, as to how much are people spending on housing, just the housing piece of it. And that can be an over level, you know, when you look at people who set budgets and so forth, and we even look at that here in the city, that can be overly burdensome. Affordable childcare. We're finding, you know, one of the comments that was made, that there's an increased truancy from kids not going to school because they may be at home watching a younger sibling rather than them being in school. And when we talk about our workforce and we talk about what's contributing within our community to other matters, that becomes a very challenging thing for households and for the future of our community. I know that even as a parent myself, I remember back, and my kids are in their teenage years, I remember when I found out I was pregnant, calling all over the place to get on to a wait list, and that hasn't changed, and that my kids are over a decade old. I will not tell you my age because that puts me in a different place. The mental and emotional health providers, again, as Vice Chair Giomi was mentioning, the providers for both youth and adults. And sometimes there's already provider shortage, but when you have providers, you have a lot of providers who will accept adults but will not work with youth. There are other situations that go on with that. Not just the providers, but when the providers are available, do they have the ability to do all of the different aspects across the range of activities? Can they do the screenings and assessments? Do we have outpatient services and inpatient services? And then that crisis care, as was mentioned, if somebody's in crisis, we don't want them waiting 90 days before they can get any kind of services. And then we have the impacts on other programs within our community and our other departments. We did take a look at the importance of social isolation. That came out in the report frequently during this, and Director Aker has the actual full report in front of her, which is available on our website. I didn't think you wanted all 300 pages of it, but
Oh, we have it.
We have it.
okay, you got access
That's
to
why
it.
I was teasing.
Oh, okay. I'm not giving you a 300-page report. But the social isolation piece, increasing support, and we're going to see that in another slide, but our seniors, our youth, even those who are, I'll put them in my age range, the things like, it may seem silly, but having somebody who can help you get somewhere, having somebody you can rely on, having somebody who can give you a hug when you need one, those are big pieces in our community. And it was identified that there's just a real lack of services for youth. And we're finding that parents are trying to go not just to our neighboring county to the north, but they're looking at having their children go out of state, and the costs associated with those going out of state to be able to seek those services, and whether or not your insurance will cover something if you have insurance. And so it's just an expansion of that cycle that's there. And the social connection piece, this graph is, it's difficult to look at in looking at those percentages of respondents who marked none of the time or little of the time having somebody that they can talk to, who they feel like can be who's listening to them, or that they would have somebody who could help them if they were confined to a bed. And that goes to other areas. Someone who makes you feel like you're loved or wanted. And these are inherent humanistic aspects for our society. And if we don't have these, then it does impact other areas, right? It impacts our workforce again. It impacts our social dynamics. It impacts the way that our youth interact with one another at school. And then going back to the COVID-19 impacts, 2+ years of not seeing one another, not being in contact with one another, how does that look? It challenged relationships. With families, it challenged relationships with friends, school performance, work performance, these dynamics of not being in an environment where you're next to one another. We interact differently when we see each other face to face than when we're behind a screen or when we're behind a mask per se. And so this has impacts for what we'll be seeing in our community and how we need to do things. And you can see that as our communities in some ways were more rural in some aspects than others, they had greater challenges with some of these dynamics. Access to healthcare for our special populations. Very few providers who have competence in our region associated with different populations. So seniors, we don't have a lot of providers who are specifically trained, as geriatricians or people who can understand those dynamics. For the LGBTQI community, we don't have a lot of providers who understand those dynamics or who have that specific training that can be there. Even interacting with our homeless population, that has other dynamics that we need our providers to be sensitive to. And then we find that prevention and treatment of some of the more common chronic diseases like heart disease, kidney disease, and cancers within our community, we just don't have those providers either. So if we don't have access to health care and we're having a hard time with our basic needs, and then we're trying to get access to these specialty cares, these dynamics are interrelated, and that's why these different categories have come forward. So chronic disease prevalence within the Quad County region, you can see where we are with the United States, Nevada, and then where Carson is. Carson does better in some areas than in others. And heart disease is, higher within Carson than what it is according to the state of Nevada as well as the country. But we're also lower in some other areas as well. But we still see that one of the things that Mayor Bagwell has, taken on when it comes to obesity with her, Move with the Mayor challenges and so forth, that this is absolutely something that is important within our community.
And we can
it
do
ties
some
to
about
it ties to diabetes, it ties to heart disease, it ties to those things. So paying attention to how these are interrelated as well become important. And then people living with a disability by the difficulty. This is one of those areas that came out, and we were looking at it, again, looking at national data. But we certainly see that we have a higher percentage in our community of people who are living with a disability by difficulty than in others. But that ambulatory piece, and that ambulatory piece isn't just about, can they get to and from somewhere like their healthcare appointments and those kinds of things. This is where our services within the city become really valuable, and what some of our nonprofits are doing. We have the Jack buses, and we have others that can, they're helping take people to their appointments, but we need to be able to get them back. But it also becomes important for what we're doing as a city when it comes to how we're serving our communities during emergencies and being conscientious about those dynamics, because these are individuals that we need to make sure that we're in all of our different wards and in our neighborhoods to be paying attention to. So again, emphasizing that neighbor piece, but that goes back to that social connected piece, right? If you don't feel like you have that person to depend on, and if you're anything like some of us, where you don't like to ask for help, that becomes difficult as well.
Well, on this one, the ambulatory also then, I think back to the conversation about the trails.
Yes.
And allowing all people to get outside and access trails, and especially those who traditionally don't have access. So I think that's wonderful.
Great. Thank you for that. And so as you see, as we're talking about a community health needs assessment and the results that come out with it, as we go to move into our next phase where we're looking for community health improvement planning, that's that diversity that we're looking for feedback from the Board of Health on, as the engagement of those partners. Reasons for not getting needed care. We go back and we see that there's concerns about comfort level with the provider, a provider who may not may not be competent in being able to serve them with their culture, and culture is much more than language or an ethnicity matter. We find that sexual orientation and gender status becomes important, and lack of health insurance is another one of those areas. And then at the top, the lack of ability to pay, or lack of money, as Vice Chair Giomi was mentioning earlier. So substance use, that need for capacity across the entire acuity. So it's not just about that prevention piece where we're in schools or we're out in the community. and, you know, talking about how to stay away from drugs or how to not get involved with drugs. But there are things that happen and people become addicted even to pain pills or something of that sort. How do we help them not just transition into getting clean, but staying clean and working through those different interactions with society? Because it is an integration in society that becomes important. And specifically for our youth, we need to make sure that we've got better coordination with the schools and the different community partners. And I think our schools in Carson do a really good job of having those relationships, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that translates across the entire region. So we need to make sure we're doing that as well. And then the substance use, there's a lot of different voices out there. The one comment that's in the middle of that left-hand column there about opioids being a big problem, we do know that Mary Jane Ostrander from Carson City Health and Human Services is going to be leading our opioid assessment for Carson City that will help us identify the gaps and how we can address some of those matters. And then that's, again, going to be tied into the Community Health Improvement Plan and partners that we can be working with, making sure that we're not overlapping those services, but that we're having those services run alongside one of another so we can have better support for that prevention. So the full report, you can access it through Carson Tahoe, the website that's identified there. It is also on our website. And I cannot thank enough people who participated in this. And I know that a few of you also participated in giving feedback through different focus groups or interviews, which made this really quite a robust report. I'm excited about what can come from the Community Health Improvement Plan and how it can give direction. You know, Carson City Health and Human Services, sometimes we're leading efforts and sometimes we're the convener of groups or convener of different entities to lead those efforts because they're better subject matter experts than we are in those types of things. But that's where we're going to really lean on the board to give us ideas. And as Nikki mentioned during her presentation, they can send an email to her. You can give her a name. She can reach out and so forth and have them put in the subject line Community Health Improvement Plan, which is what leads us to our next step. The chip. Yes. So again, another robust collaborative effort. We need those diverse partners. There will be some who participate in the community health needs assessment that will participate in the chip, and there will be others who will not, and we'll look for others. But it is that continual process for us to evaluate what's going on, to look at how we can impact it, to implement programs and implement different ideas, and to make change so that maybe at the next community health needs assessment in 3 years, we'll see the pendulum move. We've seen the same kind of areas show up, but we would like to see the pendulum move.
I'll open for comments relative to the chip here in just a minute. I would suggest that we look broad-mindedly at this because I think, as Supervisor Schutte said, you know, there are a lot of things we're already doing or are going to do that would be classified as an improvement. So I think taking our strategic plan that we've already adopted and you've all participated in at the staff level and just going through that and finding what items in there that we already have listed as priorities over the next few years fall into the chip category. I think that's, to me, that's easy, you know, low-hanging fruit to be able to identify those things and being creative about it because you're right, making sure that that trail is accessible to people who wouldn't otherwise grant them access does a lot of the things, you know, an opportunity to get outside, an opportunity to exercise, all of those things. And you wouldn't normally think of a trail that, you know, we didn't even have to pay for as contributing, but I think that's a great thing to look at. So any other thoughts or comments that anyone might have relative to that? Or the chip, I should say?
Yes, thank you. To reiterate, or I guess other, in terms of the wraparound services, to speak briefly to that, the whole idea of transportation, and in this, the 300-page report, one of the quotes was, a lot of our patients come from Silver Springs, which is 45 minutes away on the highway. We discharge people and then they have to figure out how to get home. I think right there is a perfect example of how addressing the support side of access to care can then help mitigate the negative impact of the lack of support. So I've heard in the past that people come from other counties, they have treatment, and then they're here. They really don't have a way to get home. And so I love this in that it really highlights in a very comprehensive way the real needs, the real difficulties, and what's in store. But I think it's super worth pursuing ideas and support.
Any other comments? One more thought that I had as you were going through the disabilities and some of the services that are needed that certainly I think fits into a CHIP is to find a way to communicate existing resources to people who need them. I mean, it's always a challenge to connecting needs to service providers. I think a lot of times, and I don't have data to back this up, maybe you do during the process of doing this, it's not so much that services aren't available, it's that the people who need them don't know about them. Like Jack Assist is something that I've told people who are disabled who didn't know that it existed. And that's a huge benefit to the community for someone who's disabled. Yes, ma'am.
Just based on what he said with even Jack Assist, but even just the standard Jack. During RTC meeting that we had, an issue comes, even a barrier is to where our tickets are sold for access, right? And so those are, while it seems small to us, to a person that is disabled, having them have to get to a bus route to get the ticket isn't on the bus route. Anyway, just for the public that might have been listening during that or others, and you're going to be working on it here, we are trying to develop an avenue for like an advocate for people with disabilities or whatever, that they could handle the paperwork or the compliance requirements. And so I hope that we put that on the list as something that we can do to put some great minds together to say, hey, let's make another, I don't know, place to obtain those discount tickets. There's an answer when we put our mind to it, but I don't want it to be pushed aside or left out just because it's not on a list or not on a priority or something. But I bring that up as working with RTC staff, with Mr. Martinovich and things. If there's providers that you already have that are licensed payees, and sometimes there's lots of little things you could just add that, oh yeah, they can sign for their discounted Jack Bus tickets because they're already seeing the client. And so anything we can do to make more single point of contacts and not take people through 15 different places to obtain the service. I just bring that up, that we're working on that to help alleviate a barrier.
Thank you for that feedback, and I appreciate the comment about being creative. There's an answer for everything. It's the creativity of getting to it and going through that. And Mayor Bagwell has given us similar advice in the past, Vice Chair Giomi, about spending some time making sure that we're having the information accessible to the public, finding ways to reach the public, finding ways to make that information known, not just it's here, you got to come find it. How do we get it to the public? And so that is something that we have taken internally, and we are definitely working on that. But we also want to hear the creativity from some of our other partners, as this group goes through, that how are they reaching different entities? Can we consolidate so it's not 45 different websites or 22 different apps on their phone? Is there some sort of resource hub that we can be looking at that if somebody goes to one place, they can find what they're looking for or find the connection to what they are looking for?
All right, all great points. I don't know that we need to take action specifically. I think you have enough direction from the feedback unless someone on the board thinks an action is needed. Otherwise, I'll thank you and all of the participants, and thank heavens for the contractor because I was involved in the very first one of these that had to be done by staff, and it's an effort. So I'm in, yeah, I don't,
Certification?
does it require action? No.
Then I'm just,
Okay.
I just want to make sure we shouldn't come back and shoot. I need
Yeah.
a checkbox there.
Okay, that's it for item 23C. We are to public comment. Is there any final public comment? Hearing none, I will adjourn the Board of Health meeting with our thanks.